What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. Let's talk about patch 13.11, which is the first follow-up patch to the mid-season update. As a quick intro of what I have seen, what we are thinking about, and what's going to be happening going forward, the measurements so far seem to indicate that bot lane role agency has in fact gone up. My theory on this so far is there are some outlier items that are too strong. Those are the champions that are getting played more often. Those are the items getting used more often. So any world where you bring the top level outliers down and the bottom level outliers up, you will tend to overall lower the power of the class. So I did miss on some targets here with the crit item update in 13.10. There are more changes to be had, by the way, in 13.12 as well. I know we haven't even started 13.11 as far as the rundown, but there is more work to be going. We started to get a little bit of pro play here as well. I also believe that not only are there, of course, some balance outliers that, again, we'll talk about and get to over the course of time, but also I believe that an enchanter-heavy metagame is also going to increase the value of bot lane overall. If you think about it, if your AD carry Ashe feeds, but you're playing like Rel or Leona or Nautilus or something, that's okay. You can go CC someone and Jax can go win the game instead and you can go do whatever. But if you're playing like Lulu or like Sona or Janna, which are champions that generally buff AD carries more than they buff other roles on average when items like Ardent Sensor are more popular, and you have these in games more often on average because the item is OP, well then which AD carry wins tends to mean more. I'm not saying that literally all bit of AD carry role agency going up or bot lane role agency going up is because we have a few more enchanters. I think there are a lot of things happening, but overall do want to bring down bot lane role agency overall a little bit more from where it is now. Again, balance outliers, class adjustments, whatnot, and individual champion adjustments as needed as well. Of course, certainly relevant. Any champion that's coming out is like clearly the best champion in the game. Well, it's going to tend to dictate the game a little bit. So a lot to talk about. We'll get into it when it's important, but let's go ahead and look at the patch real quick. There are a surprisingly large number of champions getting adjusted. We intentionally waited on 13.10 to see how champs actually ended up. For example, if you measured 13.9 data, Rek'Sai was slated to lose like 8% win rate without Prowler's Claw. The value over replacement of Prowler's versus like Stridebreaker was like 8% win rate. Obviously, that's a pretty fake stat because only people who don't understand Rek'Sai go not Prowler's Claw on Rek'Sai. So waiting a patch to see what the actual result is, and it turns out Rek'Sai only needs about 2.5% maybe of win rate. And so, waiting and measuring that pretty relevant. How much of Renekton lose with Prowler's Claw? Enough to get buffed. Kalista actually lost win rate on the patch as well, was already not doing very well. It's worth noting that Kalista is work that I had picked up maybe a couple of months ago. The initial impetus, we'll talk about it with the Kalista setup, but we moved Kalista forward, gave her updates. Ivern, once he was ready from a script level, wanted to push him along with buff sharing. So at the same patch this is happening. Azir, I always intended to give follow-up buffs to. That happened once we saw he is still not a pro problem, so here go get some direct power. Akali's been out of the meta for a while. TS been out of the meta for a while. Easy buffs there for these champions. Aurelion Sol and Mumu, of course, overperforming in generic solo queue environments overall. Aphelios and Jinx clearly dictating the pro meta a fair bit. Now that we'll have some more time now to react to 13.11, things like Zeri are going to be on the chopping block, don't worry. And of course, a slew of item updates to things that are overperforming here as well. All right, let's go into the patch itself. Also, a Rel midscope is happening. Cool. First up is indeed the Rel midscope. So there's a lot going on here. There are a lot of numbers. I'm going to try to do the numbers justice while also calling out the actual gameplay changes that are relevant that are not easily mathed out. So first things first, Rel overall has less armor and less magic resist. However, she is going to theoretically steal a lot more armor and MR over time because you can steal up to 12.5%. You can steal off of more than just an auto attack. And because the abilities will apply a stack of her passive as well. Now, I don't know 100% if it's like per tick of damage. For example, Rel's R ticks 4 times per second, but it will tick on every single opponent. So even if it only ticks 1 time per second or 1 time period, well, you're still getting 3 ticks of this because you're hitting 3 champions as opposed to 0 beforehand, right? So this is very, very hard to math out correctly because instead of stabbing once every 1.5 seconds for a 10% steal, you have more stab speed. We'll talk about that math in a little bit, but also your abilities all apply, and that's all going to matter here as well. So there's a lot going on. But she's going to steal armor and MR more often, to a lesser amount individually, but probably a greater amount overall. That is compensated by her armor growth and MR growth going down. That's going to be hard to math out appropriately. We've got to kind of guess, and that's just going to be happening. Overall attack speed, of course, is up. Baseline move speed is down a little bit, down by 5. We'll talk about what that actually means, though, in the W and E changes, which is where her move speed is further changed. But again, just TLDR, overall attack speed is higher. Armor and MR is lower until you start stealing. You should theoretically be able to steal more. We'll see if that ends up being actually true. No more passive bonus damage on auto attacks. Keep in mind, though, that you have higher auto attack speed, so this is going to be relatively equal in terms of actual DPS. Okay, let's move on to the next piece here, which is the Q is now a stun. That is, of course, a very, very large change. This means a whole lot. The cast animation is slower. The damage is lower. Now, keep in mind, this is an ability that you're going to max last, and I believe, I'll double check, that Rel used to max this last as well. So really, it's 70 becomes 60 is the only actual change. And it looks like, yeah, maxing Q second was in 1/4 builds, but maxing E second was in 3/4 of builds, at least at all ranks of MMR. So let's assume, on average, she's maxing it last, which means a 9-second cooldown becomes an 11-second cooldown. Not a huge change, though it is a change. 70 damage becomes 60 damage. Not a huge change, though it is a change. Cast time going slower definitely matters, don't get me wrong, but it now stuns instead of doing the other stuff that it did, which is like this kind of weak heal and whatnot. Overall, I would say that is a generic buff to the ability, even though, yes, there are a bunch of small cuts. Again, cooldown, damage, cast time, the actual overall coverage here, keep in mind that she does dash 100 units forward with the swing, so this now hits 120 behind instead of 150 behind, and it hits 624 instead of 685 forward. So it is a smaller hitbox, it does take longer to land, it has a longer cooldown, it does less damage, but it's a frickin' stun. And so in isolation, my belief is that Q as an individual ability is buffed. That is my belief. You may disagree, but as a skill, having a relatively long duration stun is a pretty big deal. And keep in mind, it also affects everything. So in terms of total damage, if you're hitting through a minion wave, you're going to do more damage than before, period. You're going to apply a passive to more than just the minions in front. It's going to apply that passive to the champion at the end. Now, again, this passive is much weaker, right? It's 2.5%, but it does deal full damage. It does apply the passive everything. Hey, I would say overusability, I would say higher on Q. The big concern, of course, is that the cast time being slower definitely matters. Don't get that twisted. This definitely matters, but hey, by the way, this does indeed exist. Okay, what's the next piece? Well, Pheromancy Crashdown now gives attack speed and attack range while dismounted. I'll take a second here to actually go over, sorry about that, to go over a bunch of the numbers. So here is her baseline attack speed before and after the patch without Crashdown, and here's her attack speed before and after the patch with Crashdown. This is assuming you are still going to be maxing W first. If we assume that is true, then here is her attack rate before and after, and you cap out by level 9, and it is a substantially increased amount of attack speed. Now again, your armor MR steal per hit is definitely lower, right? Instead of getting 10% and then 10% and then 10%, you're getting 2.5% each hit. Overall, probably auto attack armor MR steal is lower than pre-patch, but again, it affects on your abilities as well, and you're probably overall auto attack DPS probably going to be higher simply through the attack speed, even though the passive DPS is down. Is her auto attack damage that really relevant? Not really, but hey, it's here. Again, here is the baseline armor MR on the kit before and after. We're going to kind of highlight around this area we're pretty solidly in the mid game. It's, level 13 is pretty late in the game, so this is, I think, a pretty fair highlight. And it's like, yeah, you have overall like 3 to 7% less armor durability and 3 to 7% less MR durability. This is not just comparing 65 to 78, but the overall durability of your kit. With 78 armor versus 65 armor, it's 7% less durability. That's how the math actually works out. So yeah, she is baseline frailer. Again, around 5% less durable. That is true. But with everything else going on, maybe so far it's arguably a buff. We'll talk about the rest of the changes as it goes on. Of course, she does get more bonus armor in MR, so that 10% steal is really an 11% steal. This 2.5% steal is a little bit more than, right? It's 12% of that, so it's slightly higher than it was before. So the steal is worth a bit more. Your armor MR purchases are worth a bit more. You're certainly not going to make up for it instantly, but directionally she scales a bit more off gold. Okay. As far as this amount of move speed is concerned, instead of being reduced to 280 baseline move speed, she gets a 15% slow instead. There also was a move speed cap on the champion. This mostly only mattered if you bought Mobies. For what it's worth, her most common build was not Boots Mobility, so don't know if we expect her to buy that now, but it does open up the opportunity to buy Mobies because you're no longer going to get stuck by the MS cap. I did basic math here, and I said, look, actually, we're not there just yet, sorry. What's the W thing? Yeah, it's damage in the shield. Okay, so of course you do actually max W first. I believe you still will. And so how much damage is the deal? How much is the shield? Because the shield is nerfed by 5 and by 2% max health. The magic damage is down by 0 to 20. And so here is a W damage before and after. Definitely a meaningful consideration here, doing 20 less damage in your burst. Your overall shield strength, keep in mind that this shield does not have a duration. It would just break on taking enough damage, down about 10% as well. There is a lot of red in here, right? And it's a lot of red with the upside being, hey, by the way, your Q stuns. There are basically 2 big mechanical upgrades, and we'll talk about them when we get there, but there is going to be a lot of red in this patch rundown. Obviously, if she is actually underpowered, there can just be buffs, so we'll see what happens, but anyway, yes, the numbers are indeed lower here. Overall slide distance is down, overall radius is down, overall jump range is down. She does have less stun coverage with the W, though this is still going to pretty easily right, hit 720 range here, right? It's going to jump 400 and then slide another 320, and the AV radius is 180. You will still be able to hit confirm Q into W. So if you play horse form, you get in range, and you land Q, the Q stun will be long enough that you will land the W, and you will have a stun combo. This means that Rel has a reliable stun opener that is not just into horse form flip. You can go for a 600-ish range Q stun into crash down and land a stun combo that way. Your R can probably set up for it. There are other ways of playing this around. So even though the numbers are down, keep in mind that usability has changed via having a 600 range stun with your Q. It is dodgeable, but we'll see what happens, right? Again, there is a lot of red, but through internal testing, it was deemed pretty aggressively, especially by some like really high elo players, that like Rel's been OP and you gotta keep finding ways to shave off power. So even though there is a lot of red here, it's like, what can I shave off? What can I shave off? Because the usability, I believe, actually has been really powerful on this kit overall. That's, as far as I can tell, that really does seem to be true. Knock-up duration, yes, that's down as well. But again, your, 1 second can become 1.5 seconds by landing Q plus W. Again, Q being an AoE stun. Pretty relevant stuff there. Hey, at least her slide is faster, so you're going to get through your target a bit sooner. Something there. I want to point out that both Q and W have jungle monster mods. So jungle Rel theoretically possible as a high pressure gank champion. By the way, another possibility there for a champion. Mount up is getting the initial bonus move speed. Instead of it being move speed on mount up, that move speed is moved to her E active. We'll talk about those numbers in a little bit. You still get some move speed at the very start of mounting up to kind of like sell getting onto the horse and going a bit faster here, but it means that you can mount up and then press E and then kind of carry that forward. I haven't really accounted for this in numbers changes, but hey, by the way, that is something here as well. So we'll talk about the passive bonus move speed she got from the W passive and counting the new passive bonus move speed she gets from character levels that is put on an E passive. So let's talk about her dismounted move speed as a champion, which is, again, this line of text here. So her baseline move speed was 280. Now it's just a simple 15% move speed nerf, although her base move speed, of course, is 330, which means that in the first few levels of the game, it is roughly the same numbers. And as far as I could tell, even though the note here says nerf early game, buff late game, as far as I could tell, unless I'm doing something wrong with how Rel actually calculated her move speed, functionally, you got boots 1, maybe say at level 5, you got boots 2, let's say at level 9, and you had, right, plus 25, plus 45 move speed, and at these breakpoints, when you bought boots at these points in time, you weren't running into the move speed cap on W, which was like 290 to 400 based on character level. Now, if there are ways to get percent move speed, like if you bought a chem tank or someone else had a move speed buff for you, or you bought a Shirley for some reason, hey, that might have run you into the cap, or you ran through like Scuttle Crab or any other way of getting move speed, which, exists in a few places, right? You got some Cloud Drakes in your team or whatever. So you don't have that looming over your head anymore. So there are situations like, again, running through a Scuttle Crab zone or hitting a like Chem Rift Scars. Again, these are like pretty minor situations, right? But like they did exist. So that's gone. But yeah, you're 4 to 5% slower overall as a champion. Not a huge amount, but during Crashdown, you are, as far as I can tell, slower as a champion. The one thing I do want to point out, though, depending on how it's interacted, depending on how it's implemented, because slows typically don't stack in League of Legends, there is a chance that this slow gets functionally overwritten by, like, Nunu pressed E, and you just have, like, 50 more base move speed in combat. Like if Singed press W, or like anyone has a Rylays or a Zero Q lanes or any of these things, depending on how this is implemented, this can just simply be ignored and doesn't exist anymore, and you just simply have 50 more move speed in dismounted form in like half of all champion combats. I don't know for sure. I'm just saying it's a possibility that that's true, which means it would be a buff late game in any world where you're running into slows, which, I mean, honestly, relatively frequent. Lulu presses Q, things like that. Again, I'm not sure. Again, the move speed cap is gone. But a possibility. I just didn't look into that. I just don't know. Okay, so how about the mounted move speed? So the way that Rel out of combat move speed worked was this was the passive thing, and she basically had a like 5 to, I believe, 15% bonus move speed that capped by level 16 here, and that has transformed into a flat move speed gain that is 5 to 50. While move speed while mounted, and again in full effect while out of combat. So here is her underlying base move before and after, and it's relatively close. First few levels certainly not going to be there, so if you're chilling around in horse form first few levels, you're not going to be in a very good spot. But once you get to like your first recall or so, you have really similar numbers here. This is a bit less move speed, and even though the column is red, your move speed is very, very similar. So this is a nerf. It is a very, very, very small nerf. I think this is pretty negligible and not too big of a deal overall. When you are in combat, though, what happened was the 5 to 15% move speed multiplier got crushed pretty aggressively into almost no buff at all, whereas this flat move speed buff is simply cut in half, which is overall more generous, and it means that, again, if you have boots 1 right here and boots 2 right here, you actually got a fair bit of green, and again, past level 13 like kind of doesn't exist in this champion, so really the real change this champion is this, which is, again, exists, right, is some degree of red here, but I would say in combat overall, horse form Rel is probably a bit faster on average overall. Is it a very big deal? Not really. Also, by the way, this does mean that Mobies are slightly worse on her, because Mobies are a percent move speed, or sorry, give a bunch of flat move speed, which sort of multiplied the old percent move speed. But Mobies was like 5% of all Rel games, and so not a huge deal, but worth calling out that in those cases, yeah, Mobies are a bit worse on her than before. Okay, we got some more math going on here, which is hitting the actives. So this is one where, again, the difference in how the character actually functions is a pretty big deal. So E is a new ability, and it gives her and a teammate quite a lot of move speed over 3 seconds. The ramp up is quite fast. I think it hits the full ramp over the course of like 1 second, and then it remains at the max level for the next 2 seconds. And so it's a 3 second move speed buff instead of a 3.5 second move speed buff. And the way this worked, by the way, was if you were running toward an enemy champion, you got the 25 to 45. If you weren't running toward an enemy champion, you're getting 15. And this is basically, it's 15 to 25, well, not running toward an enemy champion, or 30 to 50 if, and 30 to 50, right, is higher than 25 45, and the 15 to 25 is higher than the flat 15. So the actual buff here is stronger in at least potency than the old buff here. Plus you're getting the free 30% decay when hitting W, and then you still have your E. The benefit here, though, is that you can only ever use mount up at most every 22 seconds by crashing down, waiting 15, then mounting back up. Attract and Repel, well, the new one, has a much better cooldown than 22 seconds. Which means that even if you think this ability is worse in terms of the actual move speed granted, it is up way more often and allows you to be in horse form, chill, press E, run fast, do a Q into W combo, whereas the old version was, no, I have to mount up, be in horse form, get the flip, use that to combo my other E, but like that move speed combo has a 22 second cooldown at best. And I've got to waddle around in human form to then mount up to make my play. And so much less of basically this character's kit is mount up to take an action or crash down to take an action. It's like, no, I can just be in mounted form, run around the map fast, and then the best version of my kit is, yeah, I press E for the move speed. I already have all the move speed and horse form from here, and then I can just crash down as part of the combat combo. Right? And this is such a big structural change to how the champion functions. I, by the way, believe this is like better for the champion, right? You run around the map in horse form, and then even in horse form, your attack speed is higher. We had the data table earlier on, it's like 5% more attack speed, roughly. And then I run fast, I land my Q, I crash down as part of the combo, go, I can do all this stuff. And if you want, you could instead still be in Crashdown form, mount up, get this buff, press E, get this buff, go for a flip, use the flip to hit confirm your Q, and then combo that way. That means you're in combat as W, but that was the old way it happened. But now instead of like I WEQ as like a kind of a bad armor shred and like a really crappy heal, but I flipped into stun into press and Q, it's, yeah, I pressed W and E, I flipped into stun, which was my Q. It's the same stuff, right? Like E stun becomes Q stun, W mount up speed becomes E mount up move speed, like it's all kind of the same stuff. And the fact that the mount up move speed starts high and then decays compensates for this starting low and going up over time. And then add to the fact that this is a pretty good amount of damage. Now, to be fair, I did not math out this damage versus the old E damage. I just kind of didn't bother. But hey, that's there. The other thing is that she gains move speed to her teammate. So the old attack and repel was like, hey, there's a stun tether between me and you get some armor MR. This gives some other homie a bunch of move speed, which means Rel, as a jungler, you're like, I'm in range. Let's go give this Nautilus or Rakan some move speed. Let's kill this guy. Or, you know, my Maokai is coming to jungle gank. Let me give him move speed and let's go together. So the fact that Rel buffs someone else's move speed is a lot of power. And I would argue a better and funner ability than I gave this guy 10% bonus armor MR. You could think how you want about the E stun versus the Q stun. I think the Q stun is more usable as an ability. I think the overall usability of I can chill as mounted up and press E for the move speed and like then combo my kit, I think that flows a lot better. So there is a lot of red in these data tables. Like, this is true. There is a lot of red in these data tables. However, I believe pretty strongly, and I've play tested this Rel a few times, once in jungle, twice as support, and a bunch of other players better than me have played as her as well, and deemed that she was pretty strong. I believe the usability of this kit is substantially higher. A lot of the numbers are like kind of the same and kind of, you know, moving around, not doing a whole lot. It you know, like this like, you know, in combat like W move speed and out of combat W move speed, like passive and horse form, like it's not very different, to be clear. Like this damage, just like, well, okay, this is my unmounted move speed overall. I guess it's something like all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, okay, there's some reds moving around and there is some red, and like these matter. Like these aren't not changes, but we spend 15 minutes on Rel. This is the takeaway. This kit definitely functions different, and I really believe the kit flows better. I think that's kind of a cool thing. All right, next change. Akali gets flat 10 damage on Q. This obviously is not the biggest thing of all time. Sorry, let's actually scroll down. Here we go. There's a damage. This is without any ability power. This is with an approximation of ability power. You know, a moderate damage increase. Once in a while, this can find you into a wave clear breakpoint. Occasionally, or a 2-hit breakpoint or a 3-hit breakpoint. Like at some point, there will be a situation where the minions would have had 10 health or 20 health or 30 health, and they're dead instead. It's going to be some win rate. It's not going to be an absurd amount of win rate, but it's going to be something. It's going to matter. She's going to gain some win rate. We'll see if Akali's back. Amumu got very, very, very overbuffed. I shipped the change to Amumu a few patches ago, which basically increases early W damage and then put the W rank up just as % health damage. This is walking back how aggressive that buff was overall. Since Amumu maxes W last and should still, basically it's very easy to just like graph how much damage did a bunch of flat level 1 damage on W give. Oh, it gave this much win rate? Okay, we can walk it back some percentage and walk his win rate back. So cool. Nothing too much to talk about here with Amumu. His win rate is clearly too high, especially in low MMR. So it goes down some. This is going to matter. It's going to slow his clear back down a bit. He'll be fine. Next is Aphelios. I know it's a really easy meme to be like XD, Riot keeps changing Aphelios's like base stats or his like QWE rank ups. I will defend that they're actually really important things or pretty good things to change. In fact, I think there are still things we should change about Aphelios's base stats. Because I think he gets actually an incredibly large amount of power for free via just leveling up and doing basic stuff. Anyway, one thing that I identified looking at Aphelios, I just had a conversation with the designer who actually did this change, and he more or less took my suggestion, which is Q going down is actually a good thing. So I think it's actually interesting if Aphelios has a good choice structure around maxing Q versus W versus E first, second, and third. And when I buffed Aphelios W back in 13.5, which suddenly made him the best AD carry in the game from unplayed. Pros, what are you doing? I got him to a point where W second and E second have the same win rate. As you can theoretically choose between the two, and they're close enough in power level that ostensibly you can make a good choice and be like, actually, this is one where I'm going to try to kill squishies. Actually, this is one where I just need to go DPS on frontline. And you can make that choice, and there is a real reason to pick one or the other. Success, right? One more choice axis for Aphelios players who are paying attention. I think it's a good thing, right? So anyway, in this case, Q max is clearly the best, so it can go down, and maybe there's a reason to go W max. Who knows, right? We can figure that out. But the other thing is that Aphelios has functionally much higher AD than other champions. So this is Aphelios' base AD before and after the changes. And you can see that by level 9, you have 3 less attack damage, or 3 less attack damage, which is whatever. But they said, hey, why don't we compare this, even accounting for buying items, to like a normal marksman like Jinx, who has, I think it's 59 plus 3.1 or something like that, or 3.15 attack damage growth, which is like very, very like average, very median AD carry attack damage. And you'll notice that Aphelios has substantially more AD than Jinx. And this is literally giving them the same items at every level. Like, they're using the same equation for bonus AD and when it comes in from itemization sources. And it's just like, oh, yeah, Aphelios just kind of wins lanes because guess what? At level 3, he has 10% more AD than everyone else. And this is with a Doran's Blade and a stat shard. And it's like, oh, right, he just, right, spikes at, right, 3, 5, 7. Like, he just has more AD than other champions, so yeah, it turns out that Aphelios is a really, really good laner. Now, to be fair, he only ever has access to 2 spells, right? He can Q, W, Q, and then if he's like really cool about it, he can do that as a third gun comes around and get a third spell, I guess, possibly. But like, everyone else gets to hit more buttons than him, arguably. So, you know, there's something there. There's, you know, Jinx does have kind of more buttons to press. Okay, yeah, her Q and Aphelios W are the same button, kind of. But, like, she has W and an E, and he has only a Q. So, you know, there's a debate there that, like, maybe that's okay. Yeah, how much power's in the kit? How much power's in the abilities? But regardless, he does have baseline more attack damage than other champions. This is just true. And again, Jinx is a very average AD carry in this regard. She's neither too high or too low compared to other marksmen. So anyway, it's a random thing pointing out. So that is one thing that I noticed, is that Aphelios actually has a pretty laning phase because he has more AD than everyone else. And this just kind of is true. Either way, it is a small nerf. We move on. Next is Aurelion Sol. Aurelion Sol is getting a mana cost nerf on E, as well as an AP ratio nerf on E as well. Here is the mana cost before and after. It is 30% higher for a large portion of the game, eventually tapers down to the same amount by level 13, but of course going to be a pretty meaningful nerf to his laning phase, to his ability to constantly farm stacks. He can more easily run out of mana when doing this. Here is the overall damage of the E itself. This actually does matter quite a bit, considering that he wants to kill the entire wave during the duration of this E, during these, I believe it's 5 seconds long. And if, right, you're doing 40 less damage to every single minion, that means you have to make up, you know, 40 times 6 damage back somehow. Now, that's a little bit fraudulent. You know, a lot of the minions are going to die very early on, and it wouldn't take the full duration here. You know, the Q is going to burn through one, then the next, and the next, and the next. But this still does meaningfully change how much you can wave clear. Even though this looks pretty small, this can have a pretty meaningful impact in how much he's actually able, how many stacks he's actually able to farm. I think it's actually fairly relevant here. And we get the follow-up buff to Azir here. Azir was not seen at MSI. Ultimately, you know, the first version of changes to Azir were, hey, can we move this champion in ways that are not pro-skewed, you know, to buff him in the hands of lower-skilled players. Honestly, I think Azir really had a lot of illegal gameplay around getting to spam Q in lane, it having a short cooldown, it having enough base damage via Q plus the auto being enough damage, the mana cost being pretty low, his base mana being relatively high, and the, like, ability to play around it being really low. So Azir's base mana is down, Azir's Q cost is up, Azir's Q cooldown is functionally up because he doesn't max first anymore because the damage is locked behind W, and like all these things certainly made his laning phase feel a lot worse. It got really, really nerfed. The hope is that, hey, he's got laking compensation, he could feel good in team fights, but ultimately Azir is of course out of pro play. His win rate is okay-ish, not great, better than it's been in the hands of lower elo players as it has been in a long time. But of course, there's room for strict buffs. And in this patch, I'm really targeting things that were requested by like Azir players on live, and are meant to feel very good, to sand back off the rough edges that can feel bad playing Azir, bring back some things he lost a long time ago, and hopefully it's like, hey, look, these should feel good. Azir should right? A Zero player should be happy with these changes. If the win rate is too much and he's 100% pick ban in pro, he has to get nerfs again, of course. If this isn't enough and he's, still sub 50 win rate and he's still not seen in pro play, we get to buff him again, right? And that can happen in another 2 patches or so. But Q cooldown, pretty heavily improved for a large portion of the game. Qmax second is going to be pretty much the standard thing here. It's already the correct build path right now. It's going to continue to be the correct thing, especially with less of a cooldown incentive on this. Accounting for the AP ratio, here is an expectation of how much damage per hit is on the W. A pretty solid 4% DPS increase mid to late game, which is, I think, pretty reasonable overall. So, buffs to Azir in DPS, a little bit of summon range so that he is a little bit more likely to be able to land W autos on mid-range champions in lane. So, a bit better tools, maybe fighting off against range champions when Q is down. Maybe W auto could be enough for him. Overall, these are the changes. Ivern getting changed now that his passive no longer exists with buff sharing. Buff sharing is becoming a part of the patch overall. So, stuff going on here. You can Q when used on red and blue and raptors and whatever, and the cooldown gets cut in half in those situations. So if you want to zip around the map, it's going to be a bit more frequent. Cast range up a very little bit. Cool stuff there. You can now press Q itself to go into melee range. You can auto attack to move to your auto attack range instead. I think it's a very, very good change. But if you want to be like, oh, I've got my shield on, I want to pop this for the slow and for the damage. Okay, I will double cast Q. Okay, don't want to do that. All right, Q then auto. I'm going to go that way instead. Cool, sounds good. That's the way we are going, right? That seems pretty reasonable. You can now give bonus damage on hit to ally champions. On hit damage is 5 to 15 based on, I assume, W rank here. Yep, now applies to ally champions at a lower value overall. When you spawn brush, they last for 5 more seconds, and brush duration can now last 15 seconds longer, or they will despawn if you lose vision control, so your opponents cannot use the brush for you. Big usability upgrade here. Of course, support upgrade here, pretty powerful here as well, And a visual effect, no actual gameplay change to the Brushmaker autos, but cool stuff here. Trigger Seed, if you don't manage to detonate it onto an enemy at all, if no enemies are hit, you just get to refresh the shield instead. If the shield only goes to like half health, goes back to full. If the shield wasn't broken at all, we just got a double duration shield for someone doing stuff, whatnot. I believe it does not pop a second time. It just decays out and disappears at the second duration, but regardless, that's a cool stuff here as well. Some changes to Daisy, more attack range, some health regen, some move speed. We can do the math on the attack speed, and we can do the math on how much damage the Daisy slam deals. So here is her attacks per second before and after. Her base AS went up. She got a different amount of attack speed from the ulti. Overall, better in the other game, about the same in the late game. Okay, sure, whatever, not a problem there. The amount of damage on the slam itself, meaningfully higher. This is accepting that he's going to build a fair bit of ability power. He might not overall, I believe. Yeah, I believe this has ability power math on it. I could be wrong about that one, but I'm pretty sure it has ability power math attached as well. So, hey, assuming he builds a pretty meaningful amount of ability power, Daisy does 35 to 20% more damage. If you don't build any ability power, then the damage is higher because less of the damage is being carried by ratios and more by the base damage itself, right? This 40 to 80 increased damage. So Daisy's more powerful. Cool beans. So next is a change to Jinx. So once again, much like Aphelios, we were in a spot where Jinx was entirely unpicked in pro play. This now reverts the attack speed buffs she got in 13.5 or whatever. So the sum total changes between 13.5 and now are her W has a bigger slow, her W costs less mana, and she has less attack damage growth than before. So if Jinx is still a really high pro play 80 carry, it means that she should have been really, really good before the patch as well. But if people really want to trade attack damage for a slow on W, and that's really going to be the deal breaker, I just don't agree. So we'll see what happens. Maybe this breaks the camel's back at the very end. Either way, whatever. Jinx now scales a bit less for free. Her overall growth stats are lower. I guess she slows a bit more on the W and doesn't run out of mana nearly as often, but I feel like pros aren't running out of mana on W anyway, so 10% increase slow on W is the sum total change. She has less attack damage before. Jinx is still going to be in pro play. It's going to be hilarious. Anyway, move on to the next champion, which is... Oh, actually, we can do the math here. So this is not accounting for items or runes, which is a little bit fraudulent. So in the real world, the impact of this is going to be a little bit lesser. Just imagine between these two numbers, basically. So this is her minigun attack speed before and after. And you can see it's, not a very big change. It's, 1.5% less DPS pretty late on in the game. This is assuming a fully stacked minigun, which of course is not on at all points in time. It's also assuming no attack speed from runes and items, which is also not accurate. So, give and take something around here. This is, however, her rocket form DPS before and after, and again, assumes no items, no runes, which again is fraudulent. But, your first attack doesn't have the tempo applied. And if she went for Legend Bloodline instead of Legend Alacrity, She should have no attack speed there either. So again, somewhere between these two numbers is the real world, but she loses some DPS via how much attack speed she gets from base stats. It means something here. Of course, Rocket's not giving her any free attack speed like the minigun does. It's going to be more impactful, of course, on that one. Okay, let's move forward to Kalista. Big changes to Kalista. So I said I would talk about how and why we got to this change, and so let's talk about what's going on here. So this initially was a project I pitched, and then it got accepted, and so I started doing the work around, I don't remember, let's call it 13.9. I don't really remember. Maybe it was a bit earlier. I don't know exactly. But I had some free time as I was finishing up mid-season update, and I wanted to, since Kalista was still not getting seen in pro play, I was like, look, we know Kalista is often a pro problem. We know that, this is a really big binding for her. But I mean, at least we can get her into pro. Let's buff her into pro, and maybe try to buff her in ways that are, maybe help her in solo queue. Had some discussions, thought about, hey, what if we made crit Kalista a thing? Maybe if she crits, she gets 2 Ren stacks. Maybe Q can scale off crit chance, or Q can literally crit itself. I started looking at how much damage like Jace Q deals. Like, what is a reasonable amount of damage for an ability like this that has a really aggressive AD ratio? What's reasonable here? What's acceptable here? But had some discussions, and a different designer was like, hey, why don't we start with removing the really annoying rules on Kalista passive? The missing when people go in fog, and the 90% total AD ratio when you land an auto attack. Why don't we do some of that? Because basically there is a compelling argument against crit Kalista, being that it's just rend Kalista with extra steps, and Kalista being an on-hit champion is, I think, a pretty reasonable argument for uniqueness, that her being a Rageblade champion and, really actually playing around rend is pretty unique. I think there's an argument to be had there. I don't want to get into it, of a back and forth what could be had, but ultimately, version 1 of this change list was, okay, let's just remove the passive interaction of autos missing, which is strict power up, and let's change her AD ratio on hit from 90% to 100%. So we're going to remove that punishment back out, and then I'm going to do a bunch of math to try to bounce the champion back out at the end. Okay, sure, fair enough. Let's go do that. Let's go see what that change looks like, right? And then when the patch hit for 13.10, we're like, oh, wow, Kalista lost 2% win rate. She is really bad. Okay, well, she's one of the champions that we want to compensate for the 13.10 changes. And I was like, well, look, we've got these Kalista changes that are sitting, that we've gotten a little bit of testing on and seem to feel fine. What if, and we're gonna ship this in 13.12 if there weren't other Kalista changes. If it didn't need any changes, we would that was when we had QA time and room for testing. And so it was gonna chill in a future patch, and then we're gonna pull it down and release it in 13.12. Was gonna be 13.12 or 13.13 was gonna be the timeline based on how much QA resources we had. It was well, we need to buff Kalista. Let's not give her a 1-2 patch. Let's just give her a big patch that lets her feel good, because it's okay, we're gonna reprioritize, we're gonna push Kalista up, and we're gonna chip her in 13.11 instead. Okay, sure, fair enough, which means, okay, well, I need to go find about 2.5% win rate worth of changes. Now, because I did the changes, I also nerfed Hurricane this patch. I knew that she really needed about 3%, which is going to be 2.5% accounting for Hurricane changes, because she's probably going to do about 0.5% win rate from Hurricane being nerfed, because Hurricane is easily her most common second item. So, okay, end result, the goal is 2.5% win rate to Kalista. Right, 3%, but, with her items builds changing, obviously it moves around a little bit. Okay, fine, whatever, we'll do that. That's totally reasonable to do. Okay, and so I went to go find more changes. And one of the big drives we're having right now is, hey, really, really, really try not to undo the durability update. And I have an instinct that for the next 6 months, we're going to tend to nerf champions on their damage, and we're going to tend to buff champions on their durability. Now, it's obviously not happening every single patch here, right? Azir is getting AP ratio on W, and cooldown on Q, which is the damage skill. Akali got 10 damage on Q, right? But a Mumu got damage down on W. Either way, it's not going to be a hard fast rule for literally everything we're going to do, but I'm going to kind of push in that direction a bit. I have other theories around these champions that we're going to talk about, maybe at another point in time, probably not for this patch rundown. Either way, so it's okay, well, let's increase her base health. And version 1 of this change list also had her health growth going up as well. It was going to go from 114 to 120, which actually made her base health and health growth both be identical to Thresh, which I thought was kind of cute. That Kalista and Thresh can have the exact same health pool. It's a little, nice little tight thematic tie-in. ultimately, I got pushback like, does she really need 120 health growth? No, not really. She does need some compensation for, she used to build shield bow first item, and now she doesn't. She builds it third on average, but it means that, she has lost some durability overall. She's not buying lifesteal until third item, and so I went for health regen instead. And I'm of the opinion that AD carry should get a lot more health regen now. Now that you're not buying shield bow early and BT is pushed toward the third item, I think we can actually really heavily increase lifesteal on AD carries, and it's one thing that I'm going to probably nudge toward a bit is saying, hey, you don't have easy lifesteal access anymore. We pushed BT towards third item. We pushed shield bow toward third item. Maybe some of that can be softened at some point in time, but it's like, yeah, no, we said you're not allowed to just like stack freaking shields. You're meant to be burstable. And if you're going to buy something like shield bow, it's meant to be a very meaningful durability, a very meaningful DPS loss, right? If you're going to go pick the durable item, it should mean you really do sacrifice some damage. In the meantime, let's look at baseline AD carry durability, baseline AD carry regen, if they're not buying a shield bow every game, because right now I think shield bow's overall game pick rate is like, it's like 1.5 or 3%, and it used to be in like 15% of all games. I forget. I looked up the numbers earlier. It went down a lot, of course, but it's like, okay, well, there are many fewer shield bows in the game overall, and there are no bloodthirster shields in the game anymore. So like this class has gotten squishier, right? That is definitely true, which I think is good. I think AD carries should get one shot by an assassin who finds them. I think that is a positive thing overall. I do believe that, but in the meantime, we can kind of go in a direction. So anyway, health regen up, health regen growth up. This gives her tied for the highest health regen in the game. This gives her the overall highest health regen growth in the game, or vice versa. I think this actually might be the highest in the game, and this is tied for the highest. I forget. It's one of the two. But either way, she breaks new ground on one of these two, and is tied for first in the other. The attack damage and attack damage growth are compensations for the 90 to 100% base AD thing here. This is compensation for this attack damage going down. And these changes are compensation for the attack damage going down, right? Because you can see the AD ratio is substantially higher, right? 25 to 45 instead of 23 to 40. The base damage going down is basically a make good off the fact that I did a bunch of math in terms of how our damage works out. And then the one extra strict buff I tried to ship, not counting the health regen, and health regen, was early rend cooldown is down. I actually am really proud of this change. Like, it's actually a very good change. To be fair, it was someone else. This was a Reddit comment. I was reading Reddit before work one day, or after work one day, I forget which. Time's a circle. It was both before and after work at any given day. But someone was talking about Rend's cooldown. I'm like, actually, if you're good at Callista, you just reset your Rend. Now, I think this 8-second cooldown is important, because I don't want to be a situation where we start a fight and I auto Rend you, and then I just chase down and I chase down and I chase down, but I got that first slow, so you're fucked. I'm in melee range of you. Rend again, you die. That is not acceptable gameplay. Now, if you're clever and you hit a minion and you hit a minion, and then I hit you and I rend and I reset off the minion, now I'm clever, right? If I hit, go, rend, and I'm clever, good on me. I'm smart. I did the thing, right? This should never be a 3-second cooldown, right? That is unacceptable. This should never be a 3-second cooldown. But if it's still 8 to 10, right? The preserved gameplay of learn to get the reset, go get your skill expression, go learn to play the champion well, is preserved. But if you screw up a rend early in the game, and you're like, I mistimed my first rend, I didn't get the minion kill, my bad, I whiffed this. Okay, well, you're less punished for misplaying. All the skill expression for the parts that matter are still there. It's less punishing for what if you make a mistake. Now, my initial pitch was actually 8 seconds flat here on this cooldown. The pushback was we're worried about slightly overbuffing the champion, and also incentivizing Qmax over Emax. Now, I don't believe that's going to happen. Now, to be fair, the damage instead of being 6 per rank is 4 per rank, but the AD ratio instead of being like 3-point-something% is 5% per rank. So I think we still get a pretty good amount of value of maxing E, but it's a valid concern. I think Callista is at her best when she is doing Emax instead. So, okay, fair enough. We'll go in that direction. So now let's talk about all the math. Now, to be fair, when I first did these changes, right, it was in like 13.8 or 0.9, which means it was doing the math based on her old builds. Her new build is Rageblade. Is Rageblade Hurricane, which only has 30 bonus AD on it, when her old build was Shield Bow. So the old assumptions were that she had more attack damage very early on in the game. She has a bit less attack damage until we're on to like 3rd or 4th item now, but the math still works out pretty well. And let's talk about, here we go, the math with Callista. So here's her base health before and after. It is up very substantially in the early game, and then, pretty trivially up in the late game. But hey, this is a champion who no longer gets to rush shield bow, so you're a bit more durable. I think it's totally reasonable to do, totally fine. Health regen up substantially. This is a champion, again, who is not buying any lifesteal until third item. And so your regen is up a little bit in the early game and pretty meaningfully up in the late game. Worth noting that I've actually somewhat targeted these numbers. The time to fill her health bar is now relatively flat by game time. I forget what the numbers actually are anymore. It's several minutes, to be clear. And look, she buys the Doran's Blade almost every game anyway. She's gonna have some form of sustain. Legend Bloodline is not an uncommon rune on this champion. So she has ways of getting sustained no matter what. But it basically says the basic out of combat AFK regen timing is going to be relatively flat now across time, which I believe is just directionally a pretty good thing to do with regen stats, is to have the regen feel about the same at all points in time. I just believe that to be a good thing, and so I will usually go in that direction whenever I can, because I like to be a bit detail-oriented with the details that I care about. And look, if we're just going to give her some power, it's I can pick whatever numbers I want here. I'm going to pick ones that align with my goals. Okay, so let's talk about, we're going to have 9 data tables here, okay? So here's the functional base AD of Callista, if you don't buy any items at all, and it's, a little bit higher. And of course, if you buy items, you're getting 11% more out of those items. And so her functional base AD, her actual on-hit damage, is higher. And keep in mind that she has, 61 base AD. If I wanted to fully change this champion to be an average marksman, it would be 60 base AD and be 3.1 attack damage growth. But I decided instead, no, we're going to compensate everything by about 10%. So I only went down by 0.5 here, a bit more than 10%. Only went down by 5 here, a bit less than 10%. I didn't want to really take away too much of how much power she got from base stats. And I didn't want to, too aggressively mess with how much she was scaling. I basically wanted to push her more toward the mean, and so it meant I took a little bit more from attack damage growth and other sources, because part of it is I buffed AD ratios into clean numbers, and so I just kind of kept moving things around to where I could get clean numbers on things like Rend, and on things like Pierce, and on this, and got to a spot where I was pretty happy with the numbers. So a lot of this was just how can I make the numbers line up while still having clean numbers in other places, which I'm pretty happy about. So okay, her functional base AD, if she never lands Rend ever, she actually does more auto attack damage. Accounting for buying items, this is, by the way, accounting for buying Rage Blade, buying Hurricane, and I think we'll see. So if we look, yeah, so this is actually using her real live item builds. She has a Doran's Blade and runes. Here she buys a Rage Blade. Then at some point she buys a Hurricane. Then she buys a Shield Bow. Then she buys a BT. We're going to consider it unstacked at all points in time. It's a little bit fraudulent. And then she buys a Guardian Angel. So this is literally actually items she buys. I guess to be fair, at one point we need to actually remove, we need to add 37 here because we're getting rid of the Doran's Blade. So here are the numbers, right? And the actual items that she actually buys, here's the numbers before and after. She does more damage on auto attack. Okay, how about her Q damage? Well, her Q damage without items is, we don't really care, but with items, it's really close, right? And we can do the actual math, how much damage is he actually losing, for reals, and it's, very, very little, right? It's a bit less damage, not a meaningful amount. Let's add a decimal. It's yeah, she lost 2 damage on Pierce. Again, the first time I did the math, it was with the assumption of a Shield Bow, which has more attack damage, old Shield Bow instead of Rage Blade. But honestly, the numbers are pretty close. In internal testing, she was feeling really good, so I didn't mess with the numbers. I didn't do any other math here. It's look, we're within 2 damage. We're honestly going to be fine here, right? So, okay, here's the numbers. Cool, let's move on to the next piece. Callista E1, this is damage of just the Rend. Just the damage from the Rend itself is down, even accounting for items. Now keep in mind, the base damage on E didn't change, the ratio on E didn't change, so she, as a champion, has 5 to 15 or something less base AD, so this means that Rend's damage itself is lower. But that's kind of fraudulent. How about what she actually deals with the auto attack and then Rend? So if I auto you once and then pull Rend right away, my damage is, it's basically identical, right? It's, okay, my E auto, or my auto E damage is really close together. Right, this is, I think, this is when I grab Rage Blade, right? I get more items, bam, right? My AD ratio goes up. And honestly, maybe right here, I actually get the pickaxe. And so, there should actually be a, what is this, 37.4? And this is also 37.4. And it's actually, yeah, you got pickaxe on your level, I don't know, 4 or 5 recall. And it's yeah, we're chilling, right? It's fine. So I think we're probably pretty reasonable here, right? I think I hit some of the numbers here. Let's just back up. Okay. So whatever. Numbers are probably pretty reasonable. Okay. What about E2 damage? Well, again, the E2 damage is slightly lower. The base damage got lowered here, right? By a meaningful amount, right? By 2 to 10. The ratio is higher, so of course it requires items. But again, I have to compensate with the fact that this comes with an auto attack, kind of by definition. So the E2 damage with items is here. It's like, okay, well, right, E1 with items was 99 to 100%. E2, right, further stacks with items, 99 to 100%, right? Like a little bit better, level 1 or 2. A little bit of a trough here in the mid game, but then as items come in, we get our Shield Bow, we get our Bloodthirster, we get our Guardian Angel. Yep, here we go. This means that she's more likely to build attack damage items instead of just pure attack speed, right? This shifts her towards trying to buy more AD because the AD ratio on her basic attacks is higher by 11%. The AD ratio on her actual spells is up by almost 5 to 10%. So she's a little bit less likely to go Rage Blade, a little bit less likely to go Hurricane. I don't think we're going to see Crit Callista. Like, I don't think we're going into, Storm Razor or Shiv into Quick Blades into whatever. I have a small belief that a lower attack speed version of Callista will actually probably feel better to play, since her hops, if she's functionally capped at 1.5 attacks per second via her hop rate, maybe she needs Zeri passive and her attack speed is actually capped at 1.5 and she converts further AS into attack damage. I don't know if that's actually a good idea. I haven't thought about it really very much, but I do believe there is something kind of nice about her not overcapping her attack speed and making hopping be a DPS loss. There's probably something decent there. Maybe it is correct to support Crit Callista long term. I don't really know, but for the goals of these changes, the goals were not to make Crit Callista a thing. It does go in that direction very, very slightly, but I don't think we're very close to Crit Callista being the optimal build, so cool, it's slightly better. That's fine. So the TLDR, right, is that she's doing pretty similar damage. And so here's what it comes down to, which is that, hey, how often are you not rending? So, of course, in the live version of the game, she is usually buying a Rage Blade, although current data indicates that Ruin King first is winning more games than Rage Blade first. So, and if she goes Ruin King, that has more AD and less attack speed, and doesn't give you free on hits, so it's going to bias her a bit more toward this changes from the old change list. So in at a baseline level, how often are you not rending? Because it was on cooldown, and or you were going to run out of mana, or you just simply wanted to last it without burning Ren to get the last hit yourself because you're just lasting a minion. How often are your Ren stacks coming from landing Q instead? How often are your Ren stacks coming from a Rage Blade or a Hurricane, which again are combat items on her, because the more free Ren stacks she's getting, well, that means she's getting more damage, right? She's getting more Rens without the full auto attack damage landing. The more free Ren stacks you're getting, the more there's actually a bit of a nerf to the champion. But the more times you weren't actually getting the rend off because you took a team fight and you tried to rend to last at that champion, but you were off by a little bit, and now you just got to auto attack for the next 8 seconds of the team fight. That's not uncommon. That's going to happen. Or the number of times where it's like you auto-attacked and you meant to rend, but you got buster shotted or stunned or whatever, and you never got the chance to pull a rend out of the enemy champion. They are out of range. That does happen, right? This is if you literally never in your life ever miss pulling rend. You literally never ever miss pulling rend, but you also literally never get free rend stacks from Pierce and Rageblade and Hurricane. Now, which one happens more often? I don't have the answer for you, right? It's roughly treading water, maybe power slightly negative on the damage changes if you never get free rend stacks and you literally never miss rend. But you do miss rend some, and you do get free rend stacks some. Which one happens more? I don't know the real answer to. But hey, that's happening with the math here. That's what's going on here. My instinct is that this is a buff, because it is much, I would say, people lose more rend stacks to dying or getting stunned or getting it on cooldown or whatever than they get free stacks from other sources. That is my belief. I could be wrong, but that is what I think to be true here with Callista pre and post patch. And of course, in all cases, she is much more durable. She has a lower rend cooldown, and again, her autos also will not miss targets who go into Fog of War, which is also, of course, strict power positive. So we'll see what happens. Those are the changes to Callista. Next is a pretty cool set of changes to Rek'Sai. There was a version of the changes that had like 3 times as many lines. There were changes to the E, there were changes to the R, there were more changes on the passive. There's a lot going on. And then as we got data back, we're like, Rek'Sai does not need 8% of win rate. You need to cut some of these changes, and so we cut some of these changes down. We got it implemented, and so these are the changes to Rek'Sai, and it is a very big buff to a more bruiser-focused Rek'Sai. I actually took a look at some solo queue data. It seems like her best build is actually Stridebreaker into either Black Cleaver or I want to say Knight's Edge of Night, and then into Light Cleaver if you're not going to do it then. And so like her strongest builds actually do have about 1,000 bonus HP in the build. Though the most common one, of course, is Youmuu's, is what people are flocking to. Of course, with Youmuu's getting nerfed, we are going to see Stridebreaker Rek'Sai, and I really do think that Rek'Sai is going to be in a good place for a large number of players in the next patch with these changes and with her switching over to Stridebreaker as her build. So let's talk about some of the math here. So let's assume that you never build any health at all on Rek'Sai. Here is how much healing the passive can provide Rek'Sai over time. Now, level 1 healing is literally irrelevant. I believe you start Q. You don't start burrowing until level 2, which means, guess what? This doesn't exist. Oh, right, I did the math this way. Here, let's copy the numbers here, and then we can do this, and it's fine. Yeah, cool. Okay, so level 1 burrow doesn't exist, right? Okay, well, level 2 and 3 burrow heal for a bit less. It heals for 1 less health or 9 less health. Not a very big deal. To be fair, this is also using some bonus health interpolation. This is like assuming you, like, I don't know, get overgrowth stacks or something from like your jungle camp. It's a little bit fraudulent here. It's actually probably nerfed more than it really is, but like basically instantly, guess what? You're going to heal more. And like by mid game, you're healing for like twice as much. And this is if you don't build any health at all. This is like, I went Youmuu's into Prowler's Claw, into Death's Dance, into Guardian Angel, which is like not a build you're actually going to do on Rek'Sai. This is going to be you're going to build something like Stridebreaker. And you get almost 3 times the health restore from the passive. It's to the point where the health restore is actually meaningful amount that Rek'Sai cares about, which I'm very, very, very happy about. I am really happy that Rek'Sai passive is actually going to be meaningful in what it actually provides to the champion. Big ups. Very happy with this. I think this is a really good change overall. The stepped gains, I guess, sort of, I don't feel strongly about this one. What it actually means is level 4 and level 7 are meaningful power spikes. I mean, level 4 literally like doubles the value of the passive, right? And level 7 adds 60% to that. So it's a very meaningful increase. I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I don't think it's wrong to do, but it means that Rek'Sai cares about hitting those spikes, and it means that a lot of the gain and how much power this passive actually has is kind of backloaded, right? Like most of the gain in this passive is actually not 1 through 5 or 2 through 5. It really comes in at 7+, and then it's like, oh no, now it's meaningfully better, right? At 7+, Rek'Sai really has a meaningful passive to like we're outside the first couple of jungle clears now. We're into solid mid games. We're playing around things like Rift Herald now. Okay, my passive is actually quite strong here. I think that's reasonable. I think it's a totally acceptable approach. I don't feel strongly. So that's what's kind of happening here mathematically. The Q cooldown, of course, quite longer, quite nicer. It's worth noting that Rek'Sai is like Rek'Sai Emax is significantly higher win rate than Qmax, so anything which helps you go for Qmax instead, I think is actually a positive. I think is a good thing overall. Some stuff around how the Q. This is actually, I think, a smart identification by the designer who did this work. Identified that Rek'Sai Q just lasts 5 seconds, and you got to get all the stacks out before the Q time's out. But also, if you just ever burrow for 1.5 seconds, it goes away. So you can just like cleanse it and put the stuff on cooldown. Now it's like, no, it lasts 3 seconds since your last auto attack, which to me is very, very reasonable. Where like if you want to preserve, like you used 1 Q and then walked to the next camp, well, if you used 1 Q and went to the next camp, it's going to fall off more quickly. So it's going to start going on cooldown more quickly. Probably reasonable. Probably an okay thing to do. Of course, you can't burrow to do it. I don't mind this not being an optimization anymore. I think it's fine for this to be an intuitive, like, yeah, the duration refreshes on hit and is 3 seconds long, and when you lose your target, you go away. But Qbox now being, a 2-second cooldown means, hey, you get this buff, and then 4 seconds later you get it again? So no, 2 seconds later you get it again. This is a significant increase in the amount of DPS your Q will provide in the event you are playing a tankier build. Like, if you ever want to make a bruiser-style combat work, you need short cooldowns on a repeatable damage tool. And the fact that you have to auto-attack 3 times with Rek'Sai, and she doesn't buy a lot of attack speed, now she will with going Stridebreaker. Stridebreaker has a decent amount of attack speed on it. That is a meaningful change, by the way. Okay, well, if I can get my 3 auto attacks done, and I'll get them sooner next patch because I'm going Stride instead of Yomu's or instead of old Prowlers. Okay, I'm getting my Q onto cooldown sooner. Okay, I'm getting my Q onto cooldown sooner. Cool. It's coming back another 2 seconds faster. Okay, I get my Q back pretty quickly. I get it like 2 autos, right? I get 3 empowered autos. I get 2 bad autos. I get 3 empowered autos again. So Rek'Sai can spend a lot of her champion combat using the Q. And what's interesting is this actually lines up pretty well with burrowing to get a fat heal, right? Unburrow, auto, burrow, heal, unburrow, auto. Like, maybe this should actually just line up forever with the equivalent of this. But like, if you're not going to burrow between attacks, well, guess what? You get to go do cool things this way. I think this is overall pretty cool. I'm a big fan. This being up so often means it is up for you to build Fury to get your healing going. I mean, I think this is a really cool thing for the combat pattern. I think directionally, again, really, really good stuff. You can choose to unburrow early to get DPS out instead. I think this is really good change overall. As an extra story, I helped the designer so the designer who did this work, at least all the design work and most of the implementation work, is new to League of Legends PC, was formerly on Wild Rift, and doesn't know League of Legends scripting tools, unsurprisingly. The way that Wild Rift is implemented is very different from how League of Legends is implemented. And so like doesn't know scripting tools, and so I helped him through using these things, hooking these things up, passing variables around. And so it's cool that like in the few months I've been on the team, I've learned enough that I can start mentoring people on scripting, which is really cool, feels really gratifying. And so, helped get the stuff hooked up, which is, again, felt good. Again, I did not do any of the design work here. I think the design work is good. I helped teach someone some scripting. That felt kind of nice. And overall, other quality of life stuff, your tremor sense is going to pop more frequently, so you're going to see people more often. You're going to have a better understanding of what's going on. The reveal duration of range Q is much longer to make sure you can track the champion down. It's pretty cool stuff overall. And a really smart thing here as well, where the unburrow actually now matches your attack range, or your attack range matches the would-be unburrow range. So you can actually hit people correctly. Sanding off these weird edge cases of like this is the kind of min-max gets like, this isn't being clever. This is the game kind of hates you. And should never have been the kind of thing that min-max. So like very smart by the designer to find this. I don't think I would have seen this. So again, really, really big ups to the designer who like, hey, hang on a second. This should be changed. This should be fixed. I think it's a really good change. So I think directionally, all really, really good changes to Rek'Sai. Helps QMX be slightly less of a trap than it is already. I think EMX is probably still going to be optimal though. Oh well. But I certainly would like to get to a spot where QMX is correct. That's my belief. Anyway, moving forward, I think good changes to Rek'Sai. Next up is Renekton, getting 2 seconds off the Slice and Dice cooldown. Emax is typically seconds, so you'll be turning 14 into 12 by level 13. Cooldown incentive on R, and just a pretty substantial 20% damage increase on the R as well. Here is the math on Renekton cooldown. 11 to 14% shorter. Cool stuff there. As well as the R cooldown buffed levels 11 through 18. And the R damage, it does have a bonus AD ratio. That AD ratio is pretty minor compared to the actual base damage of the ability. But yes, if you keep someone in R range the entire time, you have a 3,000 damage ultimate. You're not keeping someone in R range for all 15 seconds. But hey, by the way, R really does this much damage if you can keep them, again, in range for all 15 seconds. Good luck with that, but that is how much damage this deals. Next is Twisted Fate, getting a pretty simple change. This ended up, I think, kicking him out of pro and did it way back when. I wasn't part of the team then. So reverting an old nerf to Twisted Fate. A lot more uptime on W. You can get a lot more mana back this way. You can get a lot more stuns this way. You might see TF in pro. So I mentioned the fact that AD carry is doing too well, or I guess really, I mean, we're functionally measuring bot lane agency by just measuring, just bot lane agency. Some percentage of games are not marksmen down to the bottom lane. The vast majority of them are, but there's, a non-trivial number of mages in that lane overall. I do want to point out, by the way, that doing a quick measurement, so generically, this is a pretty imprecise measurement, but I looked at it. Roughly, mid lane mages gained about 1% win rate last patch, again, in mid lane, via things like Force of Nature getting weaker, Last Chapter getting stronger, Ma getting weaker, Wit's End getting 100 gold more expensive, all that stuff happened, and mages gained about 1% win rate in mid lane. Like Azir gained, I think, 0.8% patch over patch, although the margin of error of that is still, I'm pretty sure, at, 1% is within the confidence interval there. Anyway, that was a change. I also briefly looked at bot lane. Now, bot lane, of course, again, these champions are much less popular, so these samples are a lot smaller, but bot lane mages seem to also gain about 1% win rate. Was roughly the thing, which means, hey, if they are in the same ecosystem, right? And it's like, okay, right, here's a mid lane mage facing against a mid lane fighter, or a mid lane mage facing against a mid lane assassin, or a mid lane mage facing against a mid lane tank. Roughly 1% win rate was gained. Here's a bot lane mage facing against a bot lane marksman, also 1% win rate gained, which means, using that as a very broad brush, the rough power level of bot lane marksman in that patch is roughly equivalent to the amount of rough power level that generically other champions had, right? Non-mages had across League of Legends on that patch as well. Now, there are plenty of biases here. Katarina is a very popular champion, and people were figuring out her new build because she could build a lot of new things, and people were getting her builds wrong. Yasuo and Yone were so bad they had to get micro patch buffed. Even with things like Gale Force, they were still doing pretty poorly. They got a lot of win rate gain, given to them in a micro patch. I did not check back in on this win rate data after like 12 days of stuff on the patch. So if people got better at builds, I didn't rerun this analysis. I can, and I probably will after doing this video. But like, hey, that's one thing. In fact, here, let's just go. Let's look at Swain. All right, we're gonna look at Swain, 13.9 versus 13.10, and I'm just gonna look off screen. I'm curious, like mid versus bot in 13.10, and then mid versus bot in 13.9. Okay, so mid lane Swain. Okay, yeah, he basically treaded water in mid, it looks like, and then in bot lane, yeah, okay, so we're using Swain as our example. This is fraudulent. So Swain in 13.9, in 13.9 in mid lane was 52.96, and then in 13.10 was 52.64. So Swain specifically as a champion seemed to lose 0.3% win rate in mid lane. Now this isn't. That's not quite within just variance. It could be people doing his builds differently. It could be a bunch of stuff. It could be that, like, Lost Chapter got buffed and he builds things like Rod of Ages and Jack Show and Ryleys more often. So he's probably a bad example. Let's look at someone who always builds this. Let's look at Syndra instead, because Syndra's is always going to go for like a Lost Chapter item, right? So Syndra Syndra gained 0.35%, comparing 13.9 to 13.10. And Syndra, I think, is a pretty example poster child of YOLO, a champion who just is going to build Lost Chapter, is going to be, strictly buffed by the changes. That's what she got. Okay, let's compare Swain, who has, 70 to 40,000 games in the patch. It's enough to where there's going to be some variance, but it's not going to be too bad. And Swain in 13.9, who again is actually a Ryleys guy. Let's go what Veigar, actually. Veigar is the right choice, because Veigar, as a bot laner, actually goes Lost Chapter. And Veigar was not directly nerfed in the patch. Okay, so Veigar's actually Lost Chapter champion. He does do Roa some, but seemingly, he still does it pretty frequently. Whatever, so I'm going to use Veigar as our example. So Veigar, compared to the patch, actually lost win rate to the tune of about 0.8. Swain gained win rate to the tune of around 0.3. So it's pick your champion, but I guess, as more data came in, this is no longer true. So I spent a long time doing this weird move. Yeah, so Swain gained 0.3% win rate in bot lane patch over patch. Veigar lost 0.3% win rate patch over patch. I would have liked to find another champion who just boots exclusively Lost Chapter. I guess Karthus bot is an example here. We're going to go run more because I don't know why I'm doing this. I could have done this beforehand. I didn't think about it. But let's look at Karthus in bot lane in 13.9. Karthus in bot lane in 13.10. Karthus gained, 0.35% win rate patch over patch. And with 100,000 games in each patch, this is no longer within just RNG, like variance. He actually got more powerful. So if we use Syndra mid as our example child, she gained 0.35% patch over patch in mid lane. If you use Karthus as our example of bot lane, he also gained 0.35% patch over patch in bot lane. Which means that if we use that as our tool, which is not the most accurate tool, we're basically using them as like dummy variables for how much power do other things get. It basically means that mages in mid lane, their opponent ecosystem is about as changed as bot lane mages, their opponent ecosystem, which means there doesn't seem to be really strong evidence of bot lane being substantially stronger, or like I should say bot lane marksman being substantially stronger. Like using that as evidence may be the case. Now, one theory I have is that enchanters, specifically marksman buffing enchanters, got a lot stronger. So you think of things like Janna and Sona, who got really, really good at Echoes of Helia. Those are champions like, hey, Janna gives bonus AD that breaks when you take too much damage and peels things off of squishies by her ult being a big knockback. Janna is pretty biased towards wanting to support things like Kog'Maw, and not things like Karthus, and not a fed mid laner like Viego. I don't know why. I mean, we had Viego mid before, but like a fed jungler like Viego or a fed mid laner like Kiana. She can use the AD, but doesn't need the rest of Janna's kit. Sona, her Q, gives on auto attack buffs. She cares about range champions being able to auto attack to apply the buff. In addition to the fact that like Ardent Sensor is really, really popular. It specifically gives attack speed and on hit damage, which is going to buff marksman. Ardent Sensor got a lot more popular this patch. So through that lens, I believe a fair bit of bot lane agency going up is like the ecosystem moving toward enchanters, and enchanters moves toward the fed ADC wins. That is my theory of because statistically bot lane agency has gone up this patch. But using like a mage as my dummy variable for the AD carries more powerful doesn't appear to be all that true. But it's a pretty complex situation. And let's go ahead and move on from here because we're talking about enough stuff. So Ardent Sensor, attack speed is getting changed to a flat 20% instead of a linear scaling 15 to 30%. And so here is Ardent Sensor's attack speed before and after. Now, I don't think you're really going to get a world where you can buy Ardent Sensor by level 6 and apply it to somebody. But keep in mind that Ardent Sensor's attack speed buff and the on-hit damage is based on target champion level. So it's more likely around here. And so the amount of attack that item actually gives is pretty reliably down around 20%. Using an example dummy champion of just gains 3% attack speed growth and doesn't have any items, which again, a little bit fraudulent, but it's just my dummy champion, is an actual DPS difference of 3%. If we increase this heavily and we say, hey, your fake attack speed growth is going to be more like 7%, so that you end the game with like 219% bonus attack speed, or 219% total attack speed rather. Okay, it's still, a DPS loss of maybe even up to still 3-4% by late game. So this still is actually a pretty meaningful hit. Right, this is still a pretty meaningful hit in terms of how much attack speed it's really giving to somebody and how much DPS is giving to that champion overall. So a meaningful hit to Ardent Sensor here. Duskblade of Drakthar gets buffed way more than people think. So the max bonus damage is now actually 20% for 50%, and the cap is actually up from 20% missing health to 30% missing health. I want you to guess how much more damage this passive is providing at most points in time. Like, give me a generic, how much more damage is Duskblade providing, right? Like, passive A versus passive B, how much stronger is the passive as a percentage? I mean, you might have already seen it down on the screen here, but it's 50% stronger as a passive for most points in time. It breaks a little bit closer if they're really, really low on health and probably would have already died. But the fact that it scales more quickly and to a higher number means getting 20% by 70 versus getting 15% by 80 means you scale quite quickly here. And again, the total amount of bonus damage provided is 50% higher. That's pretty meaningful, right? This means the unique passive is just 50% stronger as a unique passive, right? If this thing said deal 80 damage, then it deals 120 damage, that is a 50% stronger passive. That's what it reads as. It's also, keep in mind, it's self-snowballs, right? Because as soon as your first bit of damage does more damage, next bit of damage is going to do more damage because they're lower in health than would have been before. Now, probably not to that degree, but directionally, it's even a little bit more than that, a little bit more than that, a little bit more than that. Again, eventually it peters off at really, really, really low health targets, but very meaningful buff to Duskblade. Echoes of Helia gets hit quite hard in this patch. Now, again, something pretty fraudulent here. Level 6 is quite low. Again, it is based on target level. I think the damage per shard is also based on target level. I could be wrong about that, but I believe that to be true. So Echoes is getting nerfed largely in the healing, right? The healing is down 20% at level 18. The damage per shard is down only 10% at level 18, but because of how aggressively this thing scales off level versus how this thing doesn't scale that aggressively off of level, right? It's only 5x's, this thing 7x'd. This means that changing it from level 6 to 18 is actually a much more meaningful percentage drop, because this thing here gained a lot of stats compared to this, which didn't nearly as much. So here is the Echoes of Helia heal before and after. And I want to say, I am glad they're changing this to scale off like level 6 plus. I'm a very big fan of being intentional, really intentional with the numbers on your items, to say, hey, the smallest number on the tooltip is the actual smallest number you will actually see on the item itself. And let's peg that to what is the lowest I'm actually willing to bring this item, like in terms of satisfaction, or no, seriously, what do I think this item should do at the lowest number? And so not scaling 1 to 18, but scaling, off of, pick a number, whatever. I usually choose around level 7, 8, 9 for farm roll stuff, because if you're doing pretty well, level 7 is about correct for an 80 carry getting a 3,000 gold item. It would be probably about a level higher for a mage, or like for a mid laner. So like 7 to 8 is like pretty reasonable. 9 is okay if you're like, actually, I want the baseline number to be a little bit higher, and I'll just start scaling it a little bit later. So if you buy at level 7, you're getting level 9 value at level 7. Like, you have some wiggle room. I don't have all to be consistent. Again, level 6 can be on the low side, but keep in mind the Echoes is a pretty cheap item. And so if you're like, oh, actually, I'm playing mid lane Lulu, and I'm going to poach Echoes, and I'm going to get this item really early because it's really cheap, well, you're getting the level 6 version, whereas when Lulu at support buys it, she's getting the level 8 version. Now, again, she's buying it later into the game, but this is a way to like soft punish poaching the item out of roll, because you get it earlier. You're getting it when there's lower level champions in the game. So through that lens, there's actually a lot of intelligence in this cheap item actually starting this low, because it is poachable, it is buyable early, and it's like, yeah, you're going to get the weakest version of the item. It's going to start at 6. Lulu's never going to see this level 6 version of the item. She's going to see level 7, level 8 version of the item. I think it's actually pretty clever. I think it's actually pretty smart. I think it's actually an intelligent way of designing this. Either way, here is the healing throughput of the item, if we are even going to count the level 6 version, before and after. I can pretty quickly get to the 30% worse version, but yeah, when you first buy this item, if you're getting it on level 8, 9, 10 targets, the healing coming out of Echoes is down 40%. It is definitely weaker, right? And the damage version, somewhat similar here as well. It's worth noting these numbers are very, very similar from like level 8 or 9 onwards. If you get the level 6 version of this item, indeed it is substantially weaker, but this is kind of fraudulent. Right, level 8, 9, I think, is generally the more reasonable version of what this is. And maybe even closer to 10. And it's like, yeah, okay, they're both about 30% weaker, and this is like the lion's share of the game with a mythic for a support, right? And it's like, this is an item whose unique passive definitely got nerfed to the tune of around 30%. Like, this item is weaker, but it definitely, in this kind of lens, it got nerfed more in the healing than it did in the damage, which is good. It helps separate what this item does from how Moonstone works, which is clearly only about heal amps. So a meaningful nerf. This item was definitely overpowered, definitely overtuned, and I think this is it's a pretty big hit, but like a worthy big hit to Echoes of Helia. Next is a hit to Gale Force. I went pretty light here on crit items here in this patch. It could be that I need to collect more data and then try again in 13.12. I already have a change list I surfaced internally, a paper kit for changes at 13.12, which has more fine-tuning changes to crit items. But Gale Force, so my belief around tuning items is, first and foremost, assuming you made a compelling item that like doesn't have no niche or is meant to be incredibly narrow, something like a Mikhail's or a Quicksilver Sash, where like there's only specific reasons to buy it. Otherwise, you wouldn't buy it. It's not a generic item. If it's not meant to be niche in the first place, excuses calling, all this kind of stuff. Otherwise, and it's meant to be like pretty good, then I believe you should try to buff items or nerf items to where they have a relatively similar purchase rate across other items that it's competing with. So like, for example, Trinity Force versus Divine Sunderer, Trinity Force should probably just be buffed, and maybe it has been already, to the point where it has as many users as Divine Sunderer, so that you can actually see Triforce in the game, and it's not like, well, it's a Jax item and no one else. And then from there, you balance the outliers. And it means that some champs are hard bound to certain mythics, but I believe it's better to have, like, Jax has to build Triforce, and Zeri, for now, unfortunately, has to build Triforce, and Viego has to build Triforce, and it's like 2% above every other item. And then there's like 8 more champions where it's like competitive. Like, that's a pretty good spread of Triforce users. Because the other version is Jax can choose Triforce Divine Sunderer, and Via can choose, Triforce Divine Sunderer, and then everyone else just has to build Divine Sunderer. That's a way less good system, right? And then it's like, okay, well, yes, that means we now have to balance Zeri around Triforce. And we can try to unbind her a bit, right? We can try to find ways to bind that kit differently. And I think there are levers to do that, to walk her back off Triforce a bit and toward things like Infinity or something else. But like, yeah, Triforce got 5 AD and 5 AS last patch. That's a lot of power. That really, really matters. And guess what, right? It shot up in users. That's a good thing. We can then balance champions afterwards, right? Zeri, before the patch, had a competitive build. Like, Triforce was relatively close to her old builds. And then she got another item that just gave her 5 more AD, 5 more AS, and unsurprisingly became her best item. That's going to happen, right? And then you have to balance champion around that. Okay, you move on. So anyway, that circles back to, hey, here's Gale Force, right? So Gale Force, I think, should be powerful enough that, like, Yasuo and Yone and Jhin, a bunch of these champions, can feel good about Gale Force. And it's like, yep, this is a strong option for me. And in some games, you see Gale Force. And you see Gale Force as about 1/4 of the AD carry mythics. Because some champions are going to go Rageblade, and some champs are going to go IE, and some champs are going to go Quick Blades, and some champs are going to go Gale Force. And it means that, in a game of League of Legends, right, if you play 2 games of League in a row, you hopefully see all 4 ADC mythics. Like, that's the hope, right? And some of this is like, well, Kog'Maw and Vayne just aren't popular. It's like, well, okay, Kog'Maw's obviously popular right now, but it's like, Kalissa's certainly not. And people tried on-hit Kai'Sa, but, either way. To be fair, she is actually a pretty big Rageblade user, but like, okay, at some point you're kind of bound to how popular champions actually are, but I think, like, tuning wise, it's probably correct to tune AD carry mythics, crit mythics, to the point where you roughly have an equal number of each one. I think that is directionally the right thing to do, and then you balance the champions around that. So this is all circling back to why Gale Force has these changes. Gale Force is roughly the right popularity. We're not quite there. I forget how it actually stack ranks, but it's roughly the right popularity. Now, part of this is like Yasuo and Yone are hard bound to Gale Force, and they're really popular champions. So guess what? They're going to really bring up the pick rate. And so I chose the crit scaling on this thing as a specific Yasuo Yone hard binding lever, where like I don't care really how much damage comes from where. I don't care if this is an AD ratio. I don't care if it's a crit ratio. I don't care all of what it comes down to. I, by the way, chose crit ratio because I was really, really worried about this item being a Rengar item. I'm worried about Rengar Kha'Zix being like, XD, you thought you were in a Prowess Claw, fuck you guys. And I'm like, okay, instead of an AD ratio, which Rek'Sai and Kha'Zix and all these champs buy, it's going to be a crit ratio, which, like, dog, if you want to go Gale Force, Essence Reaver, Collector, congratulations, you built crit. Right? Like, if you want to actually go build Essence Reaver, Collector, Gale Force, knock yourself out. Congratulations. I don't mind if assassins are crit users. It means that, like, cool, your autos now matter. You're going to play a meaningfully different version of your character because you clearly now have index into auto attacks. Go for it. Seriously, go for it. Go build an RSC 4th. Go build LDR 5th. Like, go play Crit Rengar. That's a cool thing. Let him build differently. That lets him be unique. That lets him stand out. That sounds awesome to me. I'm down for that. And so I chose crit ratio kind of for that reason. And then basically just picked numbers. So it's like, okay, how much does damage should come from the base damage of the item? How much does damage should come from gold scaling? I made the numbers up, to be honest. I just picked relatively clean numbers. Said, yeah, this is going to be 150. It's going to be 20 damage per level. I rescripted Gale Force so the old version of Gale Force was scripted to, it was damage per missile. And then it said, okay, well, here's the missile damage. And then, like, Q missile, Gale Force missile 1, go deal damage. Q missile 2, go deal damage. I'm like, no. We're gonna define it as the total damage and then divide by 3 and send that forward. So I chose to do that. Rescripted it so I could, pick clean numbers. So, like, this could be 20 damage per level. This could be 15 damage per level. This could be anything. This could be more. This could be less. Like, whatever. I don't care. I'm not beholden to it, except that, like, I don't want it to be assassin poached. I want assassins to have to build the rest of crit if they want to poach this item. Anyway, it is so hard bound to Yasuo and Yone, and this item needs to be nerfed. Okay, well, I can peel back the hard bind, right? I can peel back the hard bind Yasuo Yone, make it a little bit more likely that they build Shield Bow, a little bit more likely that they build Infinity Edge, a little bit more likely. It's still gonna be their best item, but, like, if I can nerf this item the right amount, it still can't be assassin poach because no AD ratio, and it's a little bit more likely that Yasuo and Yone have item options, then has the right way to tune the item. That's my opinion, right? So that is the very long version of why this change. And again, the change might be a little bit too low. It might be a little bit too little, but that is the direction and what's going on here. And again, as we get a lot more data in 13, across 13.11, with Kraken Slayer changes, with Stormrazor changes, with all this stuff going on, we can reassess that, okay, what's happening now? Because part of it as well is Stormrazor was overtuned. And because Stormrazor gives you a bunch of burst damage at the start, and Gale Force has execution damage, this is a 1-2 punch of, oh wow, you're a burst mage. So, okay, let's finally do the numbers on Gale Force, right? So Gale Force's damage, and by the way, I just chose straight up linear interpolation of you have 20% crit chance here, 5% crit chance here. This damage should actually be pushed a bit down, and so the crit damage should be actually manifesting less here than before. So these numbers actually should be closer to 95, but like whatever's close enough. So here's the base damage of Gale Force before and after. Keep in mind that, right, because Gale Force itself feeds into this to the tune of, it was 50 damage, now it's 40 damage. Gale Force just straight up does 10 less damage. Just by the way, right? So it does 10 less damage outright, and then eventually does 20 less damage, eventually does 30 less, eventually does 50 less damage. So here's the changes to the base damage of Gale Force. If you're getting a maximum execute at 160 becomes 150, it is here. It is 11 to 14% less damage on the active. So a pretty meaningful hit in terms of what Gale Force is actually doing. Again, I'm happy to nerf this more if it needs to be nerfed. Assuming we can, appropriately grab choice structure across these items. Cool, congratulations, we've done it. We're going in the right direction. So again, happy to change things as needed, but a downward push on Gale Force, which is the best performing, I would say, crit mythic right now. So next is a big change to Kraken Slayer. So Kraken Slayer had two goals in mind. One is changing it from magic damage to physical damage. So I talked about this in some of my other videos around the crit item update, but basically what it comes down to is making on-hit items deal magic damage really help them stand out and feel satisfying. And be like, yes, I can tell what Kraken Slayer is doing. I can tell that it's valuable. Because it was like really consistent feedback in dev was people could not appreciate new Kraken Slayer because it wasn't going every single attack. It had the sound effect, but it didn't feel like it did very much. The fact, and the initial version of this item, in fact, dealt physical damage. And it might be that it was just simply undertuned, and just the numbers were wrong, but I made it magic damage. I gave it a pretty meaningful AD ratio. I tried to find numbers that like roughly kept up with the true damage output of the old item after accounting for resists. Well, of course, crushing the gold efficiency of the item not be mythic anymore. And the item ended up being slightly undertuned, despite being, it's like 95% gold efficient on stats, and then has a unique passive, which means, it's meant to be reasonably strong, and I really believe in 95% roughly stat efficiency, and then the rest being in the unique passive, and like using that as the rubric for like balancing an item, which to me gives like the right amount of power in terms of stats versus a unique effect. Is just start with a 9 in gold efficiency, and then end with a passive, and then balance the item via the passive. Is like my like actual belief in how we should tune items right now in League of Legends. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my belief. So like okay, we're gonna take the gold efficiency the same. Anyway, satisfaction, right? Anyway, what it came down to was it felt like crit marksmen were dealing too much magic damage in their natural builds. Now, I really believe that on-hit marksmen should tend to deal magic damage because on-hit marksmen are usually Vayne, which is true damage, right? But not physical. Kog'Maw W, Varus passive, Kaisa passive, and you think about like, hey, if these items can be good on Kayle and Teemo, right? Their effects are magic damage effects, right? These champions build Nashor's Tooth. They end up building things like Liandry's and Riftmaker, but they theoretically could build things like Rageblade. Like, no, these are going to be magic damage champions. Why Kraken Slayer converts into magic damage. Now, there are some cases like Kraken Slayer Callista, or I should say Rageblade Callista, where her throughput is totally physical damage. Okay, she's the odd one out. Fine, she's weirdly hybrid now. But to me, this makes sense. Now, there's a caveat here, which is, generally speaking, tank MR itemization is worse than tank armor itemization. So if you're trying to, like, beat an AD carry, it's like, well, I buy a Death Stance. Death Stance is one of the best items of the game. It's an armor item. I'm going to buy a Frozen Heart, or a Randuin's, or a Thornmail. Like, these are really common tank items. And I actually went and looked. We'll do the numbers in a little bit. But I went and looked at, like, oh, what does Jax most commonly buy? What is his most common build order? And it's, like, Steel Caps, right, which is armor and percent less auto attack damage. it's a Trinity Force or a Divine Sunderer and a Blade of the Rune King and a Jack Show, not a Jack Show. The green scythe thing that gives you CDR. I'm blanking. It's not Divine Sunderer. You know what I'm talking about. Either way, we're gonna move on. Oh wait, Jax. No wait. Hold on. I'm too stupid. I'm just gonna go ahead and type in Jax and remember the name of the item because I'm giga trolling and I don't want to say the item wrong. It's called Spear of Shojin. Yeah, so we're gonna get there. Spear of Shojin, right. So, okay, cool, Spear of Shojin. But then he builds Frozen Heart and Death Stance, like most commonly in solo queue for like the average player. It was like, oh, so his most common build has 3 armor items on it. Armor is actually quite common, right? And the best items are armor items. So, okay, that is pretty true. And so it's easy to natively build against marksmen by building armor. And it's much harder to build good MR items. And so that is kind of true. You have things like Ma, which is really good for burst defense, so that you can like block a lot of a Syndra ult with it. That works out pretty well. And so there's a reasonable argument to say like, hey, it's really scary if repeated damage dealers are dealing repeated magic damage. While that's true, I think that is balanceable. I think there are ways around that, and I think there's really, really value in saying, yeah, but these champions, you get into a game and your top laner picked Talon, your jungler picked Viego, your mid laner picked Jace, your support picked Pyke, and you're like, I don't want to play Seraphine. You're allowed to play Kog'Maw and all in on magic damage. Like, I think that is really valuable to give AD carry players and the agency to be like, hey, I'm going to play in a different way. I'm going to have different outputs. And I think we can balance these champions around MR itemization on average being weaker than armor itemization. You know what? Yeah, dude, Kog'Maw is a magic damage champion, whether you build him as on-hit Kog'Maw or AP Kog'Maw, that's fine. The playstyle is very different. And it's like, oh, he's overtuned because MR itemization sucks? Okay, we can nerf him a little bit. That's fine. I believe that is the right way to take this system. This all circles back to Kraken Slayer is an item that is not meant for just on-hit champions. It is an item that is meant for all marksmen to be able to buy and feel good about, including Jinx, who is all physical damage. And I don't think it's correct for Jinx to suddenly get a ton of magic damage. So that was an oversight on my part. I thought it was probably going to be okay, but with Hurricane having 30 on-hit damage, that was too much. Hurricane's overtuned, it's getting nerfed this patch. Kraken Slayer has really meaningful magic damage. It's too much. It's going to physical this patch. And yeah, it means that if Teemo or Kayle or whatever wants to try to buy this item, it's going to be a little bit weirder because, they can't use Sork Shoes with Kraken Slayer anymore. That's going to feel a little bit bad, but I think it's the right choice overall. So anyway, AD ratio is up, AP ratio is substantially up, and the flat damage of 20 is becoming 35 to 85, which means if you are an AD champion, you get a base damage increase and a very small AD ratio increase. If you're an AP champion, you get a meaningful base damage increase and a meaningful AP ratio increase. Because from what I could tell, Kraken Slayer was not any good, though people were trying, it wasn't any good on Teemo or Kayle. And as far as I can tell, Teemo, Kayle are nowhere close to rage by being good on them. But if Teemo and Kayle can build Kraken, that's probably a good thing. I don't mind pushing this to try to make it better. I think it's reasonable to go in that direction, and let's go ahead and start on the next piece, which is, here we go, the math on Kraken Slayer damage. So here is the tooltip damage on Kraken Slayer before and after. On a baseline AD carry, I'm assuming your attack damage is around here. 60 plus 3.1 is generic marksman. I'm assuming your bonus attack damage is around here. I am maybe slightly overstating around first item because I don't think you get plus 70 typically on a Kraken Slayer build. But I think plus 180 is reasonable for an endgame build, is about where Champ's going to end up, so it's close enough that it's fine. As you can see, the tooltip damage is, of course, right, 20 to 40% higher when you build the item. Now, of course, a generic squishy target, and this is just a bang-on average, AD carry has 4.5 armor growth. They have 24 armor, they run a stat shards, they have level 1 30 armor, they have level 1 30 MR. Pretty much every range champion's MR growth is all the same. And so if we account for baseline, Ashe, Kai'Sa, whatever, all these champions, Kraken Slayer actually deals 6 to 8% more damage throughout most of the game. And the funny thing is, Reddit really just cannot fucking do math. The number of posts I saw of well, what's the point of building Kraken Slayer anymore? XD Lamau, this item is clearly trash. Why the fuck would I build this? I just build Blade of the Rune King instead. You ruined the item. Well, in the case of dueling a Tristana or dueling a Callista or fighting Janna or whatever, right, roughly half the champs of the game aren't building on a bonus armor. It is literally a better item. Again, the goal is to buff Kraken Slayer a small amount. It is slightly underperforming. Okay, well, this is a little bit fraudulent. Not every champion is like this. And by the way, like someone like Annie scales up to 99 armor and not 107. So in someone like Annie, it's actually going to be even better. But I chose a relatively average amount of armor. Of course, there are some who are better, some who are worse. We can move on from here, though. And of course, Annie's not going to run an armor stat shard. She's going to run an MR stat shard. So again, a bunch of numbers can move around, but this is a pretty example soft target. Okay, well, what about the most common top laner in the game, Jax? Well, Jax, at level 9, on average, builds steel caps. At level 15, on average, he builds a Frozen Heart. At level 17, on average, he builds a Death Dance. Oh, well, against Jax, once he builds steel caps, it is in fact a little bit weaker, right? It's weaker as much as it was stronger against Swish Target. So if I'm hitting minions, it's just strictly better at wave clear. If I'm hitting monsters, it's strictly better at killing monsters faster. If I'm killing like a dragon or a baron or something, it's strictly better at that. If I'm hitting Jax with steel caps, it's weaker. But this is, if it's steel caps Jax, right? If you look at Jax's common item builds, 55% of the time, he builds steel caps. 28% of the time, he builds merc treads. So 2 to 1, it is going to be like this, right? But that's 2 to 1 that, which means 1/3 of the time, he builds MR, and only 2/3 of the times did he build armor. So like, if this armor gain is only 2/3 that, right? Like, what if he only has 90% of the armor, and he actually has like 110% of the MR he would normally have? Oh, well, across a large number of games, against your average Jax, you're actually going to deal more damage against Jax, because some of the time he's actually going to build, now maybe this is like not quite the right way to do the math, but like, depending on how the math goes, actually, it's buffed. He doesn't literally always build steel caps, right? It's 2 to 1. Okay, and then, well, this dude builds his 4th item. His most common 4th item is indeed Frozen Heart. Okay, well, bam, your damage takes a hit. His most common 5th item, bam, Death Dance. Now, is level 15 a little bit too early for 4th item? Maybe. Is level 17 too early for 6th item? 5th item? Maybe. But like, well, what if I build LDR? Right? If you're getting 4th item, Frozen Heart, what if I get 3rd item LDR? Oh, it's better. If I get 4th item LDR, it's better by 40% against Steel Caps Jax. Oh, you get 4th item Frozen Heart. I built LDR 5th item or 4th item, 4th legendary 5th slot. Right, I have boots. 20% better against the most common top laner, picking the most common build with 3 armor items in the build path. Most common 6th item. All right, we finally add a Death Dance. Okay, it's finally less damage than before. In the case of 6th item champions, it is weaker. You got me. Right? So, no. I don't think Kraken Slayer is actually nerfed. Now, to be fair, yes, if you are armor stacking, it is in fact weaker at 6 items. If you are MR stacking, though, right? Like this is Jax building literally 0 MR at all, right? He didn't even go Merc Treads. This is right 32 to 67. This is base MR on the champion the entire time. He never goes Maw. He never goes Wits. He never goes any of this. He never goes Merc Treads. Come on, fraudulent, right? So yeah, Kraken Slayer is buffed. There is a risk Kraken Slayer is overpowered. If I get it wrong, like this is the unfortunate thing, right? Is I can do the math and say, look, we're going to convert magic to physical damage, and I have to do a bunch of math to try to figure out how much I should increase the numbers by. And it's a little bit hard to know, right? It's a little bit hard to know how much to increase the numbers by, but it has to be increased by some amount, right? Some amount of this has to happen. And I'm kind of guessing where it's like, okay, I need to buff this item 1% win rate. Okay, well, how do you get 1% winner on an unhit item? Well, if, 1/4 of the item is its on hit damage, and I need to make the item 5 to 10% more efficient, then my on hit damage should be up 20%, because 20% of 1/4 of the item is 5% stronger as an item. Is that the right amount? Is that the appropriate power level to give something? Okay, well, if I made the on hit 20% stronger, that's roughly what happened. Okay, I think I hit 1% win rate, but it's hard to know. It's hard to know. So I converted to physical damage. I tried to overall increase the numbers. And this, by the way, is how I picked these numbers, right? Is doing the math, getting in there and being like, I found something. And then just throwing an AP ratio at the wall to be like, this should help Kale and Teemo some. We'll see if it lines up with Nashor's Tooth. And keep in mind, right, if you are building Rageblade Nashor's Kraken Slayer, you get Hybrid Pen as part of the unique passive, so you get some of this gain, right? Now, the one final thing to bring up is there is a bug right now on live between Kraken Slayer and Rageblade where Rageblade tries to give you stacks of Kraken Slayer, and that has some kind of weird interaction where it means you're skipping Kraken Slayer pox, and you're just like not getting the throughput, and you just like lose the stacks, and they disappear. It goes to 3, nothing happens, and you start over again. So I talked to the designer who implemented that system, who said, hey, let's make Kraken and Rageblade play together, which I think was intelligent to try, right? Unfortunately, there was a bug. It happens, despite his best efforts. And I asked him on last Thursday? No, it had to be earlier than that. I think it was last Tuesday. It was last Monday or last Tuesday. Once we got the bug report in, right? Because the patch hits Thursday morning for us. We start getting bug reports. We hear about the bug on like Friday. Okay, we have worked on Monday and Tuesday. And then like Wednesday is patch lock, right? So like we had 5 days of data to do 2.5 days of work, really. And so I asked him on the Monday or Tuesday, like, hey, do you mind just pulling out the Rageblade Kraken interaction? Just like don't give it free stacks anymore. He said, yeah, sure, no problem. We didn't end up writing any patch notes in because I figured if he's doing the work, he'll write in the patch note if it happened. I didn't follow up. I don't know if he did the work at all. Actually, I will learn with all of you if it actually changed. But I asked him to do it. He said okay, and then it's his stuff, right? So, you know, I could have done more for oversight there, but whatever, right? So partially me dropping the ball. Kraken Slayer is my item, sort of. Rageblade's my item, sort of. Whatever. Anyway, regardless, I believe the negative interaction... Now, it means you're no longer getting free stacks, but it means you're not going to randomly miss procs here. So, Kraken Slayer should be better on Rageblade champions now, because the bug should be fixed, I hope. Assuming it got in. The AP ratio being higher should help Nashor's Rageblade type champions as well. Or just Nashor's Leandries types builds, whatever. Anyway, that's the Kraken Slayer. Moonstone Manure, not much to say about here. Overall, buffing the item, it is definitely underperforming right now. There is a bug right now with Moonstone where AoE shields were not properly getting Moonstone's buffs. So like Seraphine W, Sona W, Karma Mantra E were not getting Moonstone pops. That is a very meaningful bug. That matters a lot. That needs to get fixed. My understanding is there was a fix going to 13.11, but that shipped with its own bug as well. So I think that's just getting reverted out of the patch. I could be wrong. I know there is a designer on Moonstone Manure bugs. I don't know what's shipping in 13.11. I don't know what's shipping in 13.12. I don't know what's going on overall, but I know that is a bug that needs to be fixed, and I know that someone is on it. Regardless, in the meantime, there are some buffs to Moonstone Manure, which is a positive thing. Not a lot to talk about here with the numbers overall. It's pretty obvious stuff that's going on. So hey, they are stronger. Cool. Let's move on. As I mentioned, I think it's correct if the items try to hit the same power level and then you balance users around them afterwards. Really, what I think to be a very big buff to Navori Quick Blades. As much as I think it is weird still that like auto attack champions, their best mythic is Quick Blades, or can be, because it resets their steroids. The more I've thought about it, like, yeah, it's kind of weird, but how many spellcaster, like, auto attack Weaver marksmen are there really? Screw it. Let them keep their steroids on forever. Like, you know what, Kaisa, Tristana, all you guys, your steroids permanently on, that's the benefit of Quick Blades. Yeah, you have more auto attack DPS through Quick Blades than IE. Deal. Like, that's fine. And so, like, even though at the time, I had a logic behind making this change back in 13.6, I think going back on it is correct. I think ultimately, Navori Quick Blades is a niche enough item that, like, screw it. Let these guys use Quick Blades, let them feel good about it, let it be good. And then honestly taking feedback into account that, yeah, this item has too much haste on it. Honestly, there's a real world this item should be 70 attack damage and 10 haste, but just 10 haste felt like too dangly of a number for an item with haste on it. I think Navori having haste on it at all is defensible. Even though, yes, it sort of fights Transcendence, they are trying to achieve the same goal, even if they don't stack as well. They're trying to achieve the same goal, and that goal is I want to cast my abilities more often. So even if they don't stack really, really well additively, the point of the item is to cast your abilities more often. These things both do that. There is a reason for this item to have haste on it. So I think it's okay that has some haste on it. I don't think it needs to have the Mythic passive as haste anymore. Part of this was just in chats with people where it's like, hey, we value uniqueness. It would be nice if these items had different unique passives. But at the end of the day, I care about that less than I care about this item actually feeling good to use. Uniqueness is not the most important thing in an item system. So It lasted all of one patch. My initial version in dev was 5 AD. If I gave more thought to this and was like, uniqueness is cute, but I think is wrong for the item. This item is going to feel bad with too much haste. I could have done that. No one would have stopped me. And it ultimately buck stopped with me. If I thought about this more, I would have shipped with 5 AD, and I was wrong here. But either way, we ship Quick Blades with a BF sword in the build path. We get 65 AD out of it. It's got, 15 haste. This could go 10 with 70 here. By the way, generally speaking, I believe attack damage is a more expensive stat than haste. I believe this will feel better as an item. I believe this will feel better as an item. And of course, this is a struck buff. I believe Quick Blade is going to be a stronger item overall. And so more champions can go and look at Quick Blades and be like, yeah, actually, I'm not giving up nearly as much as I thought I was. And so I think an overall positive thing for the item. Total price, of course, unchanged here. I mentioned overall attack speed. I mentioned overall magic damage is too high on Marksman. Ruinance Hurricane, I specifically buffed to allow it to be more usable on generic crit marksman. It's why I buffed the bolt damage to 50% from 40%. I basically made the item 200 gold more expensive. 200 gold more expensive and cut 5 AS off of it, but I gave it some on-hit damage to make Rageblade users feel good because it actually gives a meaningful amount of single target damage. Also, it was very easy for Rageblade users to overcap on attack speed. That's why I cut it from 45 to 40. It's way too easy for Rageblade Hurricane to overcap. I feel pretty strongly about that. Okay, well, on-hit damage, though, it was just, this item was simply overtuned. I went too hard on making this item good, so, with the bolts getting better, with having some single target damage access here, 5 AS swing at a 15 on-hit damage is still a DPS positive thing. I mean, I think you can pretty easily math 15 on-hit damage is about 9 AD, so 9 AD is way better than 5 attack speed, of course. It's maybe not quite worth 200 gold, but the on-hit bolt damage going to 50% from 40% definitely matters. Overall, I mean, I think Hurricane landed in a pretty strong spot overall, and yeah, we're in this spot now. So cool, here we are with this one. Hurricane is still, of course, a premier attack speed item. It is a strong item. It is one worth buying, and I think it's just better tuned now, so a nerf to 80 carries, but a relevant one here. The item is overtuned. Static Shiv. So as much as I like to lambast people about Gale Force, where it's like, hey, I got pretty consistent feedback both externally and internally that Gale Force was underpowered, and I'm like, no, I don't think it is, and I just dragged my heels that I'm not going to buff it anymore. I'm just not going to move these numbers anymore. Gale Force is going to be this powerful, and look, if I have to buff it, I will, and then Gale Force is overpowered, and we have to nerf it. I got the same feedback internally by the same people that Shiv was underpowered. So, I can make fun of Reddit. People who are very smart with good intentions, said Shiv was underpowered. I buffed it to 220% minion mod, and was like, I really believe this item is not that underpowered. I think it'll be fine. But they were right about Shiv. Shiv was underpowered, and it's underpowered by quite a lot, and so substantially up the minion mod. I up the energized damage a bit. I am very concerned with how much burst damage AD carries can deal. I figured, hey, look, if it's Gale Force, they're giving up a meaningful item, right? If they're buying Gale Force, they're giving up IE, they're giving up Quick Blades, they are opting into burst damage, they're opting out of something else. But hey, Storm Razor, hey, Shiv, hey, Rapid Fire Cannon, these are items that you're actually meant to buy without significant trade-off. Right, they're meant to be good, and they have burst damage on them. They have energize on them. Like, energize is strong. I don't want to brick energize by saying you can only deal damage from one source. That feels really horrible. The way that Sheen works, I think it is. I think Sheen is a more scary stacked concept than energize. Personally, that's my belief anyway. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's kind of my feeling on the situation. But maybe actually we should unbind Sheen and you can build 3 and we have Triforce. Well, we can't build Triforce Thunder, but like it's a bunch of Triforce Essence Reaver builds and you build Lichbane. I don't know. I'm not saying it's correct. It's not a point of this. Either way, I am definitely afraid of Static Shiv being too bursty. I only gave it 20 flat damage here. But again, my whole point about item efficiency is Static Shiv is like 97% gold efficient. It's got a 9 in front. Its stats aren't bad. It means that if it's not a good item, it just means its unique passive isn't good enough. And I don't think we can go that much farther on the energized damage against champions. I gave it 20. I don't think we can go that much farther. So okay, the minion mod goes up, and this is a pretty meaningful amount of damage, right? So if we look at Static Shiv here, right? It's as a first item, it's like 30%, 25% stronger. As level 15, 16, 17, it's like 12%. That's not a huge deal, but it can hit many champions, right? It can be meaningful. The big one is the minion mod, right? The minion is like 45% more powerful early on in the game. This is a pretty meaningful upgrade to the minion mod here. It's a lot more damage, right? It's definitely impactful, definitely powerful stuff. Hopefully this is enough, right? If I make the unique passive on an item 25% stronger, and the unique passive is 20% of the item, I made the item 5% stronger, right? Which is about how much I want to buff the item by, and that's the hope. So did this happen? Is this true? That's the hope, right? That's the hope of what's happening here. Stormrazor, though, was simply overtuned. I could have thought harder about this, but Stormrazor actually broke the rule of gold efficiency. It was over 100%. I really don't want to ship items where they're good because their gold efficiency is so high, just in big dumb stats. I want a part of their power budget to be in the passive for that passive to feel good and be impactful. There is a chance I have over-nerfed Stormrazor, but Stormrazor is the literal most purchased item in League of Legends. It dethroned Zhonya's, which means Stormrazor is way too good on way too many champions. And so with Stormrazor going down, with Gale Force going down, with Shiv and Kraken going up, we hopefully hit a much better equilibrium. Stormrazor and Gale Force, of course, have direct synergy with one another. But yeah, I went pretty hard heal on Stormrazor, which I think is an item that is just way overperforming. This is the item that was most poachable by assassins, because it's just like, here's some AD scaling flat damage, which just fits an assassin pattern, and it's a really good amount of AD. Okay, we nerf hard. And so yeah, Stormrazor is getting nerfed hard. And the intent is to nerf this item by 1% win rate. As an item, like if you were playing the same champion pre and post patch, like let's say, I want to pick Kais as an example, Lucian pre and post patch, and you went first item Stormrazor with the rest of your build not being changed, it's meant to be a 1% win rate nerf to Stormrazor Lucian with no other items being changed. Because keep in mind, right, this item doesn't affect you until level 8 or something, right? It doesn't affect you until you've earned 3,000 gold. And, you know, that means it can't affect a large portion of the game. But then once you buy it, it has to go affect it. And the feedback from a designer who has worked in the space before was 10% gold efficiency is about 1% win rate on a first item. And so using that as my North Star, I said, okay, this item's going to lose about 175 gold of efficiency. 175 is, right, 6% of a 3,000 gold item. So I've got to also nerf the unique passive by, you know, about 20 to 15% as well, right? So here's the math. It's 20 to 15% off the Stormrazor energized damage, right? Oh, I don't need this. This is static shift. So that was the math. If 1/4 of the item is the unique passive, then I need to nerf it by about 15% to get the rest of the nerf in. And so I just kind of filled around with numbers until I had numbers that I liked. This could have been a lower AD ratio and a higher base damage. But basically, I wanted to still end level 18 damage at about the same as Static Shiv. Notice that it's doing about 10 damage per level. It's really, really lining up with Static Shiv. I really tried to make the damage output of this item still higher than Shiv, because, hey, Shiv bounces. Their gold efficiency between Shiv and Stormrazor should be relatively equal now, in the high 90s. But, you know, the damage individually should be still a little bit higher to Stormrazor at most points in time. Stormrazor gives you some move speed, Shiv gives you some bounces. Hopefully we land on a relatively balanced ecosystem. And it could be that I really didn't estimate this properly, and this is a too big of a nerf, and Stormrazor is bricked. We can bring Energize back up, right? We can do other stuff. There's further questions around, you know, how much burst damage AD carry should really have. Should it be physical damage versus magic? To just like really get rid of magic damage in sources that aren't on hit damage. That might be reasonable. It makes it more of an assassin thing because, right, it means that if we balance Energize to be good enough to be good, it means that lethality is a good stat here. Maybe this needs to scale off crit all over again, but if it scales off crit, it means that you can't buy that with a Rage Blade. And it would be kind of nice if... It's actually why there's an AP ratio here, is that, like, yeah, I would like if Stormrazor, Rage Blade, Nashor's Tooth, like, was purchasable and could make sense. So that, you know, like, that's why these hooks were here. Otherwise, Stormrazor is just bad Lichbane. Like, there was never a reason to build Stormrazor when you could build a Lichbane. It's like, do you really, 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 really need another Lichbane? If you really, really, really do, fine. This exists here, but, I mean, Shiv is probably the better version of that anyway, but it's here. Whatever. Like, I am down with people trying stuff out. Like, let them try. Let them feel cool and clever, like they're experiencing stuff. If people can figure out that it's not good, that's okay. But yeah, I tried really hard to make things a little bit hybridable, and so that's the way here. So anyway, Stormrazor, we'll see how big the nerf is. Yomu's Ghostblade loses 5 ability haste, which is, you know, 100-something gold worth of efficiency, is my opinion here. You know, that's 3% or something, or 3% of the item in gold efficiency gets roughly lost around here. Okay, that seems fine. The bonus lethality at max stacks for the first few seconds of combat, down to the tune of 5 to 8. That is about a 3 to 4% DPS loss, damage loss overall. So you do 3 to 4% less damage with Yomu's for the first part of a combat, and you have 5 less ability haste. That's pretty fair. You also get stacks a bit more slowly. I mean, Youmuu's definitely was overtuned. It definitely was doing too well. So, hey, a drop to Youmuu's, a drop to lethality users, definitely going to be an impactful change here. Youmuu's Awake, of course, gets the same ability haste nerf. No big problem there. Buff sharing now exists once you have finished your item. When your smite is fully upgraded, you can smite for 1200. When you kill a buff, congratulations, a wisp will drop. And it doesn't have to be you killing it, by the way. So basically, when a jungler kills Red Rebelback or Blue Sentinel while smite is fully upgraded, they will still receive the camp's buff. In addition, a wisp will drop that someone can go grab. And again, this is only once you get to tier 3 smite, which is pretty late into the game, but is what happens there. You don't need to smite the camp, you just have to have it. If a non-jungler kills it, but your smite is upgraded, you can still get it. I love this a lot. I think this is really, really good design. It is still correct for the jungler to kill the camp. Of course, right? It's correct for them to kill the camp, which means they're going to get the gold, they're going to get the XP. But it's one fewer thing. Now the AD carry is not going to be funneled the red buff gold. The mage is not going to be funneled the blue buff gold. The jungler's to get this. This means jungler's going to get a little more gold and XP late game. They're allowed to kill their own buffs and feel good about it. Yes, you want to hand off like first blue or second blue. That's still intentional handoff if you want it. But I think this feels really, really good. I'm a really big fan of this one. I think it's a great change. So yeah, we really had a 2-hour patch rundown. I can't help myself. Patch 13.11, TLDR as best I can. Let's go. First up is a Rel mid-scope. The big TLDR is her attacks per second is up. Her baseline armor MR is lower, but she's going to hopefully steal more armor and MR from opponents because all of her abilities will start to steal stacks, not just the auto, not just the Q, but everything else is going to start adding stacks as well. So Crashdown is going to steal from stuff. Crashdown still steals from stuff. The R is a big one. The R is going to steal from everyone that you pull in. If it steals per damage tick, it hits 4 times a second. There's going to be a lot of armor MR steal and really, really valuable. If it does, that is a lot of power. That's definitely going to matter here overall. Next big thing is Q is now a stun. Its cooldown is longer. Its damage is slightly lower. Its cast animation is longer as well. But it stuns. And it deals full damage and stuns and applies passive to everything. This is a very big increase in what the Q actually deals. I'm going to skip over to what the E does, which is the E is getting the old W mount up active on the E active. So the E stun, move to Q. The mount up move speed, move to E. Overall, numbers are relatively similar, except that keep in mind, mount up, even if you spammed it on cooldown, had a mandatory 22-second cooldown, and that was with you spamming mount up and crash down to get back to the other form faster. Attack and repel is just kind of up when you need it. And the basic TLDR is the playstyle is now stand in horse form. The overall move speed of horse form is pretty similar to prior. But now you can just be in horse form chilling with decent out of combat move speed. Press E, which by the way gives move speed to an ally as well, gives you a ton of move speed, and you can then go and either get into range for an auto attack or get into range for a crash down, which is always available because you can chill in W in mount up, use attract and repel to run up and crash down. By the way, the crash down moves faster, and that will hit confirm your Q, or you run up and land Q, and that hit confirms crash down. Right? And so the whole play style having to juggle the form is a lot cleaner. It's a lot nicer. It's a lot easier to run all the stuff. And you give a homie move speed instead of giving a homie some armor and MR and a very minor heal. I think it's an overall a better kit. There are a lot of numbers that went very slightly down. Her baseline armor and MR went slightly down. Her baseline durability off of the crash down shield went down. There are a lot of small 5 to 10% nerfs on this kit, but the playstyle is so much smoother. And I think the baseline is chill in horse form, press E, and then combo from there. And your ult is going to steal a ton of armor MR from a bunch of sources right here for 5 seconds, right? And that's where your tank stats come from. That's where the power comes from. I think it's going to be a champ that's going to feel a lot better to play. Akali gets 10 damage on Q. Mumu loses 6 DPS on W. Aphelios loses 0.5 to 3 attack damage. He still has the highest AD in the game at level 9, and it's not close. Aurelion Soul gets a mana cost nerf and a overall DPS damage nerf on the E. This will definitely hamper his ability to farm stacks off the E. His E ratio, by the way, is still incredibly aggressive. It is a really, 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 really aggressive AP ratio on this build, on this button, by the way. It is one of the very best in the game. just by the way. Azir gets a 2-second knockdown on the Q cooldown at levels 1 through 7. Very meaningful there. 25 cast range on W, and a 5% AP ratio increase on W, which turns into about a 3 to 5% W damage increase in terms of the actual math. Ivern gets some really, really big stuff. Q goes to half cooldown when used on monsters. You can now press Q to go into melee or auto attack to go to auto attack range. I think it's really cool stuff there. Minor cast range increase, okay, whatever. Brushmaker can now affect allies at a reduced value. You get vision for 5 more seconds on the brush. Also, the brush can last 50% longer unless you lose vision, in which case it goes away so that you don't have to deal with enemies stealing your brush and using it against you for a long time. I think that's a positive thing as well. Trigger Seed will refresh if it pops without damaging anything. Daisy does a little bit more attack range, a little bit more DPS, which is minor stuff, but should feel good for Daisy to be a bit more of a combatant. Jinx loses some attack speed growth. It's going to affect Rocket Form or the minigun form by quite a bit, but I think it's actually good for Rocket Form to be meaningfully slower, and I'm actually glad that this change got reverted. Kalista gets a very, very big update. She has 100% total AD on auto attacks and no longer misses when champions leave vision. This is a really, really big deal. The rest of the changes to attack damage growth and Q and E are to roughly achieve parity. TLDR, if you pretty much ever missed Rens, this is a DPS increase. If you ever got substantially more free Ren stacks on targets you cared about through things like Hurricane and Rageblade, this can be a DPS loss. And it depends how often you missed Rens and it went on cooldown without rending at all, versus how often you were getting free Ren stacks and using them effectively without overkill. Beta column A, beta column B, my instinct is going to be a buff over the champion, who also gains some base health, gains some health regen, and got a much nicer rend cooldown overall on the ability. The hope is that this is a buff to the champion. We'll see what happens. Rek'Sai gets buffed, especially if you build durability. This ends up trending towards about double the passive strength if you build 0 health at all, and almost triple the passive strength if you do build health. Things like Syrinx Gauge and Edge of Night and Black Cleaver and Stride Breaker, which is where she's going to go next patch, is Stride Breaker. That this will be almost triple the power of the passive by late game. Even more if you build even more health, of course, on the build. Lower cooldown on Q to make ranking up Q a little bit less of a trap. And overall, you see things more frequently with the passive, and you see things for longer with the Q. Also, auto-attacking versus unburn with the W is stronger, which is a good change there as well. Very, very big bumps here. Yeah, Rek'Sai should look pretty good next patch. Renekton gets 2 seconds off the E cooldown. Dominus cooldown reduces with rank to make his late game that little bit better. And R damage is up by a flat 20 or 20%, I believe, right? Yeah, 50% stronger. 20% stronger, rather, I should say. Pretty meaningful stuff here. It matters, right? There's a chance I somehow did the math wrong here, but this looks like 20% more damage. Okay, moving forward, Twisted Fate. Pretty minor stuff here, right? 2 seconds off the early ranks of W. I believe he maxes Q first. You're going to feel this for quite a while. But yeah, a big landing phase upgrade to Twisted Fate. Okay, we move on to items. Ardent Sensor is basically strictly nerfed. Unless you were using this before level 6, which is pretty much impossible. This is a strict nerf to Ardent Sensor. Dustblade of Drakthar's unique passive is functionally 50% stronger. That's the math. The amount of damage this thing gives you is 50% more than it gave you pre-patch. That's the math, so that's how much it does. Echoes of Helia gets nerfed around 30% in the early to mid game, down to only about 15-20% in the end game. A 30-35% hit in the early game is a very, very big nerf to Echoes of Helia. It means if you are someone who's using something else, you're going to feel pretty good because your opponent's got a bit weaker. Gale Force lost a pretty decent amount of damage on its active. It's like 5 to like 15%, depending on how low they were and how much crit you had. Kraken Slayer TLDR, the proc is now physical damage against squishies, and once you buy an LDR against virtually everyone, Kraken Slayer deals more damage than before, accounting for champion armor and whatnot. Against tanky targets before you buy LDR, it deals less damage. That's the only cohort where Kraken Slayer is actually nerfed here. So Kraken Slayer is buffed and deals physical damage instead of magic damage on the death recap. Moonstone Renewer, a bit more to the heal and to the shield. Devoid Quick Blades gets 5 haste turns into 5 AD, another 5 haste turns into 5 AD from the Mythic passive, as well as the Transcendence Cooldown reduction getting put back to 15%, reverting the nerf from way back when in 13.6. Quick Blades definitely is the most underperforming of AD carry Mythics and definitely deserves the buff here. Runa's Hurricane definitely overtuned. It got a lot more efficient when the bolts got better, when it tracked minions better. And yeah, just overall too efficient. The on-hit damage, definitely really, really valuable. So that going down to 15 should make it a much more fair item overall. Static Shiv gets 20 damage in lightning and a pretty meaningful bump to the mini mod. This should bring Static Shiv hopefully up in line, especially with Storm Razor going down by 5 AD, which it needed. It was 2 gold efficient. And the pop damage goes down by about 15% is the rough math here. TLDR on Storm Razor, 50% less damage to the passive, about 7% less on the gold efficiency is where we're going with that one. Human's Ghostblade loses about 3% in the gold efficiency. Roughly there, sure. And then a bit less on this. This functionally translates to 3 to 4% less damage, or 4 to 5% less damage to the ground there, about 4% less damage during the window where you have all your stacks. So it is a nerf to Youmu's. It was overperforming. Pretty reasonable nerf overall. It stacks less quickly, not a big deal. Buff sharing exists. Once your jungler completes their smite item, whenever they kill a jungle camp, it's like Ivern passive. It spawns a wisp. Someone can go grab that and get their buff. If the jungler has their smite item complete and someone else on their team kills the buff camp, a wisp spawns that jungler can go grab. Which is part of why Ivern got buffs earlier on in the patch. I think it's a really cool patch. I think it's directionally a lot of good things going in the right directions here. There is still some follow-up to do in 13.12 as well, but this was a patch where we had to do most of our work with only about 5 days of data. So tougher things to figure out, like overall roll power and roll agency, and power curves, and second and third item power levels. That you need like more and more data to get through that. I mean, as time recording, like we're still not even done with 13.10 being played on live, right? And we got to start 13.12 work, and so there's more to do. But I think directionally, a lot of stuff's going in a really good direction. And I'm happy with this patch. I think there's some good stuff going on here. So thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.